The Planning and Zoning meeting for April 5th, 2017 will now come to order. Please stand with us for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can we have a roll call, please?
Chairman Williams.
Here.
Vice Chairman Shavir.
Here.
Secretary Chambers.
Here.
Dr. Faison.
Yes.
Member Baker.
Here.
Member Ritchie.
Here.
School Board Member Hare.
Here.
Okay. The quorum. Next is approval of minutes for March 8th. Is there a motion to approve or any corrections? Vice Chairman,
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve the minutes from March 8th.
is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. All persons who anticipate speaking on any public hearing item must first fill out the oath card to be heard on the agenda item and sign the oath card contained thereon. These cards are located on the table near the entrance to the council chamber or may be obtained from the recording secretary. This meeting will be conducted in accordance to procedures adopted in Resolution 24-1997. Those speaking in favor of a request will be heard first, those opposed will be heard second, and those who wish to make a public comment on an item will speak third. The applicant may make a brief rebuttal if necessary. A representative from either side, for or against, may cross-examine a witness. Anyone who speaks is considered a witness. If you have photographs, sketches, or documents you desire the Commission to consider, they must be submitted into evidence and will be retained by the City. Please submit such exhibits to the recording secretary. Staff, has all items been properly advertised?
Yes.
Has anybody here on the board had the opportunity to speak to anybody in the public about the items coming before us? And so, all right. With that, I'd like the permission of the Commission to move two items, since the first two items, let me go to the first two items we have are more administrative, and then we have applicants that are physically here for item C and D. I'd like to move those items to the first so that they can go home earlier. Okay. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay.
Okay, starting then with item 9C. This is Comprehensive Plan Amendment number 3-2016, and that starts on page 58 of 88 in your packet. And I'll give a brief summary and then try to answer any questions that you have. The applicant, John H. Evans, on behalf of the owner, Robert Carl Goth, is requesting a comprehensive plan amendment to change the city's future land use map and rezone approximately 14.7 acres of vacant land located at the southwest corner of U.S. Highway 1 and Dairy Road. The request is to amend the future land use map from industrial to commercial high-intensity future land use and rezone from the industrial M2 zoning district to the community commercial CC zoning district. And then based on the narrative that was provided by the applicant, no development is proposed. The owner is requesting the change to commercial to more closely align with other land uses and developing uses in that area. And along with that, I would just like to go on and say that, and this is also from the narrative, is that based on the description that the applicant provided, at the time of the annexation, the property subject of this request was designated with the current industrial future land use designation and industrial M2 zoning classification. The industrial future land use and zoning was placed on the property when the property was annexed in 2005 to make a concrete plant associated with the Brevard lumber a conforming use on the property, as it had been a non-conforming use per the Brevard County regulations. The concrete plant is no longer in existence, but the future land use and zoning were never changed to reflect the current conditions of the property. So with that, if you have any specific questions, I'll be glad to try and answer them. And I also know that the applicant is here as well.
Okay. Let's open this to the public. We have cards on this item.
Yes, sir. Beverly Goth.
Would you like to come up and speak, ma'am? Or, okay.
Christine Renault. switch this back. Good evening. I'm Christy Mount with John Evans' office, and we represent the applicant property owners, Mr. and Mrs. Goethe. As was stated, we submitted an application to change the future land use map from industrial to commercial high intensity, and to rezone the property from industrial M2 to community commercial, which is generally considered to be a less intense use. As stated in the application, there's no immediate proposed development. The purpose was to align the property with the other uses in the area. And as a note, the northwest corner of US 1 and Dairy Road was rezoned in December of 2016 from office professional to community commercial, which is the zoning that we are seeking. We are in agreement with the staff report and would like to compliment staff on the thoroughness of their report. Staff has recommended approval of the requested amendment to the future land use map and for the requested zoning. So we request this board's support of the application by recommending approval of the transmittal as presented. I do have the applicant here if there are any questions.
Okay. Are there any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other cards?
Did you want to speak?
I just reserved in case there's questions.
Okay. Okay, so we'll close this item to the public, bring it back before the board.
If I may, really quickly, I did just want to clarify that this is just a transmittal hearing. This is not an adoption hearing. That is referenced on the staff report, but I just wanted to make that
Okay.
clear for everyone.
So, as Christy brought up, I do recall across the road, we went through and changed that. It seems to be, there's consistency there, and from my opinion, I don't see there to be any issues. And it does make it more conducive to development of that corner. So, what are the thoughts of the board? Okay, is that a motion? Okay, we have a motion for approval.
Motion to approve.
Okay, a motion and a second. Can we do a roll call on this, please?
Member Baker? Yes. Vice Chairman Shavir?
Yes.
Member Ritchie? Yes. Secretary Chambers?
Yes.
Dr. Faison?
Yes.
Chairman Williams?
Yes. Easy peasy. Thank you. Good to see you. Okay, next item, please.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda is the item 9D, interpretation of uses in the general use and open space and recreation zoning district. This item starts on page 76 of your packet, correct?
This item before you is a request for a use interpretation. To give you some background about this, the property owner, Mr. Bo Strickland, a property that's located off of Fox Lake Road, there's a map on page 80 of your packet that gives you a general idea as to where this property is located. And again, on page 81, these are the two zoning maps that we provided to you in the packet. The applicant requested a zoning verification letter, basically a zoning interpretation letter, basically asking the staff to determine whether the use the applicant was proposing or the property owner was proposing was consistent with the zoning. It's something we typically do when someone is trying to purchase a property. In this case, he wanted to make sure that the project that he was going to eventually propose and submit to the city for site plan review would be consistent with the city's code as far as zoning. Our understanding of what was presented to us is illustrated on page 78 of the packet in an email that we had to send an email to the applicant or the property owner for some clarification. And we basically understood that this would be some kind of barn on a property that's zoned general use and also has partial zoning of open space and recreation. And this barn would be used intermittently for some events or some kind of wedding events there. We issued a letter of zoning interpretation on page 79 of your packet, and we referenced what we believe the use was going to be and how it was consistent with the zoning, and the section of the code we believed it was consistent with. Subsequent to that, we received we had a meeting with the property owner and with his architect. And on page 86 of your packet, you'll see, starting for a few pages there, a conceptual design for a barn, or a structure that looks like a barn. And we interpret this to be a banquet event center. And it kind of made us not understand whether this was really consistent with the zoning. This is a little bit more than what we thought it would be. And so we are here before you today, and Mr. Strickland is also here to explain what he is proposing. Try and ask you for an interpretation, as you are allowed to do per the code, of whether the use that is proposed is consistent with the permitted and/or conditional uses of the zoning district in which the property is located. In this case, you'll see, I'm going to refer you back to the zoning maps that you have starting on page 80 and 81 of your packet. On page 80, if you right side the map, you'll see on the north part of the map there's Fox Lake Road. The property has a piece of it that is zoned OR, Open Space and Recreation, adjacent to Fox Lake. And then everything south of it is GU, that's general use. The property owner has indicated to us that this project would be generally located on that area closest to Fox Lake, and so may bisect that line, that boundary between those two zoning districts. We looked at what the zoning code says, and I've included starting on page 82 the list of permitted uses and conditional uses, starting on page 82, of the general use zoning district. And when we looked at this, we initially, during a review of the drafting of the interpretation letter, we looked at section 59-622, paragraph D. Yes. Public and private parks, recreation areas, and game preserves. And so with the submittal of the drawing that we hear, and based on the discussions with the property owner, we're asking you if you believe that the proposed use as drawn here is consistent with that section of the code as a public and private park, recreation area, or game preserve, or if there is another use in this zoning district that's more appropriate. Then on page 84, we've included a section of the code for the open space and recreation zoning district. And if you look on section 59-642B, private parks, privately owned recreation areas similar to golf courses and tennis clubs which provide outdoor recreation activities for club members and/or the public. We initially thought that if a golf course or kind of recreational development requires would typically allow for some kind of assembly building, we thought that, well, if this is what they're doing, this might be appropriate under that. But with the new drawing and the discussions we had with Mr. Strickland, we're not sure if it really is consistent with that interpretation, with that listing here of permitted uses here. It could be maybe more appropriate under D, general recreational activities by individuals, and then also maybe one of the uses there that are listed there. But we're here to you tonight for your guidance as to whether the use, as illustrated in the drawing on page 86, and the explanation that Mr. Strickland, I believe, will give you, is consistent with one or more of the uses that are listed in these two zoning districts. I'm going to refer you. Yeah, there was another question that came up during our discussions was There are other uses that are allowed that are assembly-like inside the GU, for example, such as a church. Yeah, but that is considered to be a conditional use in the GU zoning district. Let me see. There are, under OR, you'll see under page 84 of your packet, section 59-643A, clubhouses are considered to be an accessory use to one of the permitted uses here in that zoning district. So we just have some confusion. We're not completely sure in our interpretation as to whether this use as proposed is consistent with these two zoning districts. I'm going to refer you back to page 76 of your packet, which is the first page of this agenda item. I'm just going to briefly go through this real quick. Section 31-31E6 of the code states that the commission has the ability to interpret the uses permitted in the zoning districts. Pursuant to this request, we are requesting that your interpretation as to whether a banquet facility or event center is a permitted use in these zoning districts, in the GU and the OR. Staff was unable to determine if this use is permitted in those zoning districts. Mr. Strickland has requested that you help make that interpretation. And with that, I'll try and answer any questions you have, or the applicant or the property owner here is also to answer any questions.
Okay. Before we have questions for you, let's open it up to the public. Do we have cards on this item?
Yes. Sid? Who do you want? Mr. Strickland?
Okay. Okay.
Grady Strickland, 4955 Hamlin Circle. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to pick up the 255 acres on Fox Lake Road, which basically was an answer to my family's dreams of being able to have my 3 kids and myself out on an area that we would be the only ones out there. At the same time, had the obstacle in front of us that the property had been purchased by Mercedes Homes, had set it up to build 255 units on the property. Only problem was the economy didn't quite agree with them at the time, so they ended up going into foreclosure. The bank took it back, and after almost a year, the bank and I came to terms, and then I came in with Mr. Evans and had him turn it back into what he liked to joke with me about, green acres. Basically, that's where I'm at right now. I'm looking at utilizing that property for my family's use, but at the same time, when I came in and asked about putting a barn out there that potentially would be for my use, but at the same time would be used for weddings, anniversaries, any of those kind of things. And as most of you who've been, especially this one right here that's been around for ever since time began, we don't have anything in the city of Titusville that you could set up and go to and have it enclosed and be able to cater and have a meal inside and be able to dance, those kind of things, and be air conditioned and have facilities available. Everything that's presently out there on the market falls short of that. And when my son got married, the young lady he married had been doing weddings for years, taking pictures and doing that kind of stuff. And between her and my daughter, the two girls came up with the idea of the wedding venue. We're down the road from Fox Lake, and back when I was a kid, I believe it was Commissioner Roberts came in and they built that pavilion out there, and they started with it as one size. Then he decided, well, I need a couple offices out there, so he went out there and he put a couple offices on one side. Well, then it wasn't big enough, and we wanted to put in a kitchen to be able to have picnics and that kind of stuff. But in no way, shape, or form was it ever envisioned to be 30,000 square feet, and in the today's world, what it finally ended up being. But at the same time, it's not air conditioned. It really doesn't have updated bathroom facilities. You got to walk across and over where the kids play to be able to use the restrooms. This will be, with your blessing, the first type building in the city to where all of this will be able to happen under one roof. When we started out, it was just a barn. Then it kind of, because of current codes and that kind of stuff, morphed into being able to have a porch partway around it. And then we ended up with a changing room for the bride and a changing room for the groom. But in all essence, it's still a barn. It's just a fancy one. With 255 acres, if you were to take the entire map of what we own, which is 4.1 miles all the way around the property, it backs up to 60,000 acres of U.S. Fish and Wildlife on the south side, which goes all the way to Highway 50. On the west side of the property, it goes to St. John's Water Management, has that property. So I've got the last piece of privately held property amongst all the government properties out there. With that being said, this is a small speck on the entire property and would afford our community and my family the ability to go out and have people come over and that kind of stuff without being in and around other people. We will have access off Fox Lake Road, which would be required by the city. We will have to take and have a fire hydrant to be able to handle the building if something happened there. But in terms of parking space, no, I'm not interested in having an asphalt or a concrete parking space. We'll make arrangements through CCEI to basically stabilize the area to where we can park on grass. And other than that, we'll have a barn out there and won't have anything else around it that we can bother or have any impact on it. And if you have any questions, Sid and the architect, all of us are here to be able to answer any questions you have. But I wanted to be straightforward with what we were intending to do. It may be used 2 times, Friday and Saturday, or it may not be used at all. It just depends on what the market is, but by no means is this a every day of the week business being run out there. It's more of a rural type environment, and the fact that I changed from residential zoning back to GU, which is the city's zoning for agricultural, I'm not really interested in developing the property. I'm interested in enjoying it. Any questions, be happy to answer them.
I have a few questions.
Sure.
So what I'm trying to gather is where exactly is it located on the property? And so this was the map that we're given.
Sid,
I see you got a flag lot there. And I'm trying to figure out, because they said it crosses between open space and...
We have an audience, a TV audience.
All right.
I'm sorry. Gotcha. I think you'll be able to see it. I'm sorry. This is the entire 255 acres.
Okay.
And this is the property up here. To the south of where that dot is, which is where we were proposing the building, that would allow us to tie into fire so that we would have the ability for fire rescue if we needed it. And at the same time, just south of that, we'll be putting in a lake to where we'll be able to open up the building and overlook the lake out back. From here over to this side is where we're talking about stabilizing the soils and being able to provide parking.
So on the front side, and where you're developing the barn is where that's on general use, but then...
Janet, may I ask a
questions so I can follow what he has here. Where is Fox Lake Road?
That's right up here.
Okay.
See right here,
Right.
Mr. Facian?
Okay.
It's all across the front of this.
Okay.
I know,
That's your building
that's
back
why it
on
doesn't
Fox
make
Lake.
sense. This
And,
our map
and
does
this
not.
darker line
consistent.
coming in is actually a shell road that I've built in and brought electric and water in. This lot right here, 77 and 76, is where I'm building my house presently.
Vice Chairman.
I have a question for staff. On page 80, I'm looking at the map, and I can't follow what I have here versus what he's got there. Can you tell me which way, left, right, or upside down, where Fox Lake Road is?
If you, on page 80, you look at the atlas, zoning atlas sheet and turn it landscape-wise,
Page 80.
Yeah, I got
not
it
portrait.
here, but
Yeah,
see,
style.
here, turn it this way.
Right, Chelsea has it oriented the way it should.
Let's see where it says
You should
it's
be
just
able to
light.
view it.
You can't read it online.
Don't you have it split basically in half? On one page, you got the northern half, and on the next page, the lower half?
That's true. There are two pages. On page 81, you'll see the lower half of the property.
I'm just trying to determine from, I don't need to look at the second half, it's the front half I'm looking at, because I'm trying to figure out where is it crossing over from OR and GU. And there's a reason why I'm asking that, because I'm trying to figure out of what, is it more developed on GU or OR? Which then goes into the definitions that you brought up earlier with how to proceed forward.
The applicant, or Mr. Strickland hasn't told us exactly, we haven't got a site plan to kind of tell us exactly where to be located on the property, but he's generally given us an idea of where to be. And if you look on page 80, at the very top of that page, if you orient that zoning atlas sheet landscape-wise, you'll see Fox Lake Road. This project, from what I understand, will be close to the Fox Lake Road and will straddle that boundary of OR and GU.
From his map, it looks like it's all on GU.
I agree with staff. It's basically the building is on OR, but parking, this ultimately will represent three lots across here, 19, 20, and 21. The building is on 20, which is OR, and between 20 and 19, it moves from OR back into GU. But, you know, both of them, everything else out there is all in Brevard County. And the majority of this property would be zoned agricultural. Specifically, I've already logged $38,000 worth of pine trees off the property and are presently in application for an aquaculture permit, which will allow me to raise tilapia and that kind of stuff in lakes out there. So my intent is to be GU or agricultural type property.
Well, why not why not go ahead and try to rezone into one category?
Based upon what I'm looking at, my next door neighbor over here is running this as a business and a horse farm, so they're already operating as a business out there. And in terms of the other, whether part of the flavor of what I'm asking is a recreational type
No,
usage.
and I'm not questioning that. I'm just talking specifically about the code, about how to proceed forward and interpret it, because, and here's something that I haven't mentioned yet. For years and years and years, we looked at OR as how we interpreted it as a board and as council. OR was used as a holding, it was used as a conservation, and then if you look at the map, you have pockets of OR. So if I'm, and I can't remember how this was zoned in the past, but I do recall that what we would do in the past is we would say, okay, we want to conserve this area, there's a particular unique identity, whether it be soils, wetlands, or whatever, and we would basically wrap that up using OR, okay? And then that's why I'm seeing GU around that. So what I'm asking, or what I'm, I guess, leading into is if there was any type of particular condition to that OR land that is unique that may be conservation. In the past, we used it for that, and then that's also why I'm asking why.
I'm not really sure. Once again, I may defer back to staff, but originally the property, I think the OR was included in this project as a means whereby to cluster housing that Mercedes Homes wanted to build on the
But
property.
we were doing that in the past because of conservation efforts.
Okay. When I came in and removed the residential zoning on that, it was my intent or my thought process that this entire property would have gone back to GU or agricultural, which would be consistent with what it was in the county. But I have no idea, other than staff trying to set aside properties for recreational use on a subdivision, why that was there. There's nothing unique about that front section, wetlands or anything that would drive that point.
Right. So in what we've done in, let's say, the last, I'm just throwing out a number, 5 years, we've reinterpreted that to something different. Now we actually say conservation, or it's more concrete when we have conservation on something than in the past. So that's why it's hard to look back at something, a zoning like this, and remember.
But
I can probably give you some background on the rezoning of the property and the history of it.
I mean, I recall this property coming before us years and years ago, but what I remember is that it was done as a cluster development. It was done in that pattern because of what was out there, the landscape. Because Mercedes, or whoever had it, Miranda, or I don't know, Mercedes.
Correct. Yes, sir.
I mean, if they could have built it up, they would have built it up. That's a lot of land, 255 times. I mean, they would have added 5 houses to an acre if they could have, so they would have maxed it out, but market wasn't there. But the reason why I'm going to that, and then I'll get to you real quick, is because what I'm trying to determine, obviously it seems like the city staff is agreeable that it can be used for a barn, but because it's on 2 different types of zoning, do you say is 50% on this type, and is this what we're going to be looking at majority-wise, or do we just say it's all okay? Does it go to a conditional use because of it's on the other zoning, or because it touches it? Is it permitted because it's majority on this side? And that's kind of why I was asking those questions. So,
If I may, I can explain some of the history and why the 2 zoning districts are there. And really the question for you is the use a permitted use in the GU and the OR? Now, if your interpretation is such that you find it consistent with one zoning district but not consistent with the other, then that is your interpretation. Then we have to speak with the property owner, and he'll have to speak with us to discuss options, and that may include having to rezone a portion of the property.
right.
The history on this property, it was annexed, I believe, back in 2005, and the report that I have here describes a cluster development. They were going to put a residential estate single-family zoning district on the property, and that requires 1 unit per acre. But it had an option in there in that zoning district to allow the property owner to propose a cluster subdivision. And so they still utilize the same density, but cluster them in a smaller area with a minimum lot size of 10,000 square feet. And that was proposed as part of the rezoning and a development agreement. And then the remaining area would be left over for some kind of open space or whatnot. Now, I don't have information as to why that particular piece of area that is adjacent to Fox Lake was set aside for OR. And that may have been because they may have decided that might be an appropriate area for stormwater. That was a practice at the time, several years ago, to apply conservation to even to stormwater areas. It could have been because there may have been some environmental issues in that area that probably be good to set aside as conservation, or it just was proposed by the applicant at that time and was not something that was recommended by staff. But it's there now. If the applicant is successful tonight with an interpretation of both this use being appropriate in both zoning districts, they would have to submit an application for a site plan anyway for this development. And they would have to go through environmental review anyway as part of a site plan review. And so we would determine whether that area was really a wetland or it needs to be conserved or preserved in some way as well. And that would be dealt with during the site plan review stage.
And furthermore, the determination between the way that the code is provided in both OR and GU, you may decide that this use fits in one and not the other. And then the staff would take your interpretation and go forth with a site plan to allow that use in either GU or OR, if not both. So that is an option as you proceed with your determination of what the code says that is permitted currently for GU and OR. What is before this board tonight is to determine the way that the code is written, if that meets it pairs well with the applicant's presentation of what he intends to do with his property. Is this event center, as described, something that falls within the uses that are currently permitted under GU or OR? And if not, is there something in the conditional use section that it may align closer to? And if not, then is there a recommendation that you can make to council regarding the interpretation of this use and how we can further our code, make a recommendation to amend it in the future? That's something that we can also discuss.
Member Baker?
Before we go any further, I'd just like to ask if you could please hold your map up again and show everyone where South Carpenter joins Fox Lake Road, it's not on any of the maps. I had to look it up this afternoon.
Fox Lake, as you're going this direction, takes you west to the park. Back to the east, prior to getting to the overpass, my property line on this side butts up into what used to be the old stump dump out there on that property just before you go up over the overpass to cross 95. So Carpenter is right along in here.
Okay, yeah, I just thought that might help everyone have a better understanding of this property, since I had to look it up to make sure I caught on to it. Thank you.
Mr. Strickland,
Sir.
this represents all of the property that you own and wish to have considered this evening.
Correct.
What we have here.
That's the 255 acres.
255 acres.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Vice Chairman?
This is for staff. On page 84 of 88, if you go to the first paragraph there, purpose and intent, it says the open space and recreation OR district is established to provide for the conservation and protection of sensitive lands within the city. It is intended that this district will not function as a holding designation for land, but rather a permanent classification in order to ensure that present and future residents of the city are able to enjoy the benefits of natural environment of the city. It is further intended that the district will implement the goals, objectives, and policies of the comprehensive plan. Can you explain that in relation to what we're trying to do here? Because it sounds to me like we don't have much of a choice with the OR section.
As far as whether it be allowed or you don't have much of a choice, I'm sorry.
What I'm saying is this project going to be in GU, or are we going to use part of OR?
The applicant's proposing this project to be partially part of in that area that's got a designation of OR as well. So the question is would this use be consistent with the OR zoning as well?
The commission tonight may determine that this use is appropriate in GU but not OR. That is one of the possibilities that you may decide upon.
Okay. Because, I'm reading this, you know what I mean, and I'm...
I got a question.
According to this in OR,
I got you.
we're kind of limited as to what we can do. So, I mean,
If I can point out just the confusion from staff's point of view, if you look down further, you'll see under accessory uses, clubhouses. And then you also look up in permitted uses further up about types of private parks, privately owned recreation areas similar to golf courses and tennis clubs. That's permitted by right in that zoning district. Then you look further back on the next page, on page 85 of your packet, goes on to the remaining uses within that OR zoning district, conditional uses. A single-family dwelling unit is required to get a conditional use permit. I just wanted to point that out to you. If your interpretation is that the purpose and intent language is what is really guiding this, and that the uses here are fixed, and that the uses that's being proposed here doesn't fit within the uses here, and that the purpose and intent statement is more restrictive, that could be your interpretation. I mean, if as Chelsea has mentioned to you already or described to you, you could find that one zoning district is more appropriate and the other district is, the use is not consistent.
What staff would request, though, that as the board make its decision, the commission makes its decision, for example, if you are to interpret that the general use principal permitted use, section D, public and private parks, recreation areas, and game preserves, that perhaps may be the section that you rely upon. Just articulate that, what section it is that you're using to apply that this use fits under one or the other sections.
Good.
thank you.
Secretary Chambers.
I have a question. Are you intending to use any type of farm animals like horseback riding or anything like that?
Yeah, I've got grandkids coming along, and you know how horses and all those kind of things typically end up happening. But yes, I will have cattle and I will have horses out there, but we're on the leading edge. If I went in and fenced that entire 255 acres, my fencing alone is just under $100,000 to fence the property. I'm building the house, I'm working on the wedding venue, and as I move through and cycle through all this stuff, yes, I'll continue, just like I'll end up putting 2 more lakes in. I put one in now, had St. John's out there, went through all the requirements there, and there will be 2 more lakes out there. But it is been around a long time, fixing to retire. That gives me something to keep me out of trouble.
The reason why I asked is because
Don't you say anything.
the reason why I asked is because the vineyard itself would lead us to like horseback riding or going to the lake, like you said, or
Yep.
maybe somebody had a wedding party and wanted to ride horses around the
Well,
property
one
or
of the
something.
things that we've talked about is there is a local company that has a carriage with 2 horses, that's one of the features that will be given. And as you know, down the road and into the park is, it's not a whole lot of traffic out there to where that could be enjoyed.
All right, thank you.
Member Ritchie.
According to the OR, I mean, when you have golf courses and clubhouses and things of that nature, they're normally rented out for weddings and parties and things like that.
But if you see a golf course or a tennis club or some kind of recreational activity, that is the primary use.
Right.
And that clubhouse or that civic building or that assembly building is the accessory use to that primary recreational use there. So the building by itself, what we understand, would not be permitted, but would be permitted as a part of a larger recreational function that would be open to some kind of private enterprise.
Well, the main use would be for your private use, correct? You're going to use it for horses and are you going to harvest any kind of crops or anything like that? Hay or?
Not at this point. I've got to get to that point of being able to put in pasture. But, you know, just being straight with you, at this particular point, it would be for my family's use and would be for wedding venue and those kind of things. Down the road, yes, ma'am, there's all kinds of possibilities. But, you know, we have a park out here as we go towards the beach that is a loop to where you can walk all the way through that and enjoy that as recreational, that doesn't have anything on it. So even though there is one building on here, which the majority is a barn, if you will, that doesn't mean that the environment out there, and the trees and the lakes and the animals, there are, every morning when I go out there to the house, there's 30, 40 turkey walking down the road. There's hog, there's deer, there's bobcat. The other 2 weeks ago, I had a bald eagle eating a fish in the lake, you know, using the water from the lake as he ate the fish. So it's not just the house, the entire OR area is recreational, of which you can call it a clubhouse, or we can put in a putting green if that makes everybody happy, but it's the property and the environment out there that is the recreational use. I'm seeking to minimize my footprint on that 255 acres. And I honestly do not know how the OR survived. I paid Mr. Evans to come in and change the zoning on a preliminary subdivision that never manifested itself, to change it back to agricultural, and why the OR managed to survive that or did not get wiped out, I can't tell you that. But it should have been all back to GU.
Okay.
Well,
So for
permit-
future reference, we have a TV audience, so if you would come up to the mic.
Okay.
I let it carry on for a while, but
Yeah, they don't want to see me, but that's okay.
all right, go
But
on.
the permitted uses, I mean, if, you know, you're not going to have a golf course, you're not going to have a tennis club. Hunting, fishing, trapping, you know, there's nothing there in the general recreational activities that would include a barn. Is there any chance, like on your map where you have the barn, it just seems like if you moved that to the other lots on where your road comes through, that would eliminate the OR question.
As you indicate, there's a lot of property there. It could be moved around some,
I mean,
but
just slide it over further, what direction am I looking at here?
to the west,
Okay, if you just slid the proposed plan to the west, it would
that
all
would
be in
take care
GU.
of the building, but that would not take care of the parking.
I guess I don't
These three
understand why.
lots right up here are where that needs to go to be able to, whether it's the buildings on one lot and the parking's on another, there is still going to be something in that OR zoning. And all I'm contending is the OR shouldn't be there to begin with. It should have been wiped
Yeah,
out and
that's
changed
what-
back to
that's
the
what
GU.
I was thinking that the OR should be eliminated. I mean, I think it's a great idea, but I can't see anything in the OR that's going to allow.
Well, this project is, you know, another project I've recently and still in the process of redoing the old Sunbelt Rentals building on the south end of town to bring a Navy contract in on that. And, you know, there are other projects out there to be working on, but as I indicate, Titusville does not have a place to do what I'm proposing.
I think we need something like that. I just don't know how we can
Okay. Good.
interpret it.
Dr. Faison.
Staff, Mr. Parrish, how can we accommodate Mr. Strickland and not, I guess, contaminate what we presently have.
We've suggested to Mr. Strickland that he probably could rezone that portion of the property that is OR on the north part of the property adjacent to Fox Lake Road, and thereby we're only dealing with one zoning district. He did ask that if we could look into some research about why that OR was put there, and the best thing we could come up with was that it was proposed as part of an overall development. This area would be designated as a conservation area, primarily because of stormwater. There may have been some kind of environmental review, but we weren't able to locate that to justify why that particular area next to Fox Lake was considered appropriate for the OR zoning. So we suggested that to Mr. Strickland to see maybe he could just rezone that area, and then we're only dealing with one zoning district. That doesn't resolve the issue about whether this use is consistent with that remaining zoning district, the GU. So it seems like to me that's where the commission's leaning, is that you're more important to see this kind of use in the OR zoning district. But I haven't heard much discussion about the GU. I'm not sure what
GU is, I kind of had it reverse. Where GU was more acceptable because we used OR as conservation in the past. And if you look at the clusters here and the lines, they're consistent with, they meander. And it looks more of like a conservation effort was made. That's why I was asking what I was asking and trying to get the history on there.
Well, just so you know, in 2005, when this was initially proposed or annexed, the zoning from the county had a county GU zoning on the entire property. It did not have anything else on there as far as zoning.
It had what?
It did not have any other zoning district on this property.
What was the county's original?
GU. A county's GU zoning district.
Yeah.
And at what point did the OR come in?
That came in as part of what we're seeing is there was an application to annex the property from the county, and then part of that process included a land use change with the rezoning change. And there were conditions applied to this rezoning ordinance specific to a type of development, a cluster development. So then we looked at it, there's a development agreement that was submitted, and basically a proposal to make this area and the north area of the property OR. And so it was rezoned to OR in 2005 as part of that rezoning ordinance. But we haven't been able to find out if that because of some environmental reason, or was it just that was the part of a master stormwater plan. So it seems like when you look at the map, the zoning map on page 80.
That would have never happened in the past like that. They wouldn't have come up and did the stormwater up front and rezoned it. I've never seen that happen before.
Well, we do have examples on our zoning map where ponds are designated as conservation.
Yes, but that was for conservation.
No, there's a man-made pond, stormwater plan.
Yes, but I'm saying that what we've done in the past is we've said that these areas were already developed, and then we've rezoned them, and we've said, okay, now these are conservations, and we put OR on that. That's why I say we've changed our definition of OR in the last 5 years. And I don't want to continue on speaking since I got a lot of people waiting, but Vice Chairman, are you done?
Finished.
All right.
My question again is, when it was brought into the city from the county, the OR came after it was brought into the city.
That's right.
And my question is, what can we at this point do to accommodate Mr. Strickland? And if the OR came in afterward, and I don't see how why we could not go ahead and accommodate him.
Understand he would have to provide a site plan with this development. regardless of the interpretation tonight. So a site plan would have to go through some kind of environmental review to see what kind of impacts, if any, if there are wetlands in that area.
And furthermore, regardless of the zoning that applies, whether or not there is an OR line that falls within this property, the first question before you is, does this use fall within the permitted uses that are currently described in the code? You have to decide if the code allows this use under GU, and then you have to decide if this code allows this use under OR. Those two questions need, and then we can look at the property site specific and look at the lines of where the zoning is and then determine how it can be developed as we move forward. But the first question is this use allowed?
But he could request a conditional.
That's part of your question. Is it better described as a conditional use or a permitted use? And which zoning category would allow it as permitted or conditional?
What I wanted to add too was that if the code does have a wetland overlay, and that's citywide. And so during our site review, when the environmental study is done, or environmental information is submitted to us, the code requires that wetlands that are 5 acres or more identified on a piece of property are supposed to be set aside in the conservation land use. And that's in the code right now. Now, I don't know if that was the case in this particular case here. I don't know. It may have been proposed by the developer at the time. We don't know the actual dimensions of this area.
One more way to think about it, if this question was asked of you on a different parcel, the question would be the same. Is this use for a intense event center in the GU something that we should allow for GU properties in the city of Titusville?
Understand. Got it. Mr. Strickland?
We have churches in the city of Titusville, and it allows churches here. And this type building pretty well mimics the usages of churches, weekends, and that kind of stuff. This is not a 24/7 type business.
Understand.
In terms of answering you, if it helps you, there are 3.8 acres of wetlands right here. The OR is here, part of it's here, and the other part of OR is over here. And then they came back in and set aside another area here. We do have, well, I say that, the map of the intended subdivision, did you bring that with you? Okay. I've got the layout of what was submitted to the city in terms of the preliminary use. And it was not set up because of wetlands and that kind of stuff. It was set up to allow them to cluster areas and leave other areas open. That was the...
One of the changes at that time, though, now bear in mind, this was another change in how we interpreted things, was that in the past, we used to say, okay, you have to have one for every 3 acres, and then one per 1 acre residential, right? The difference in this is they were looking at an entire site. And so they said, look, we want to cluster it, and then that way we're not using it. And so we had to reinterpret how we were doing it back then, because you were taking, you recall this, Sid? Then we were reinterpreting that to say, look, this is encompassing all the land, and that was the intent behind it. In the past, it was one building, 5 acres, one building, 5 acres, and that was where this is when we diverted from that. It was around in this time. So,
Well,
I mean, I remember.
I'm here to seeking the advice and directive to staff as to what we need to do to allow this to move on, to be able to have a decent meeting place in the city of Titusville.
It seems that everybody here wants to work something out with you, but before I talk anymore, I want to make sure that everybody else has their piece. Vice Chairman Shavir.
This is for staff. If we were to go ahead with this, with the intended use of the building, okay, for weddings and other venues, would that require a conditional use?
Depends on our interpretation.
Okay, well, I'm looking here. I hate to be nitpicking, but we do have to follow the rules. This is page 82. If you go to accessory uses, that's 59-623. Buildings or structures used for dairy barns, hog pens, poultry houses, and stables, provided said buildings or structures shall be no closer than 50 feet from any lot or property line. Uses and structures which are on the same lot and of the nature customarily incidental and subordinate to the principal building, structure, or use. And C, uses and structures which are in keeping with the character of the district. And my interpretation of that is that this would not meet the character of the district. It certainly wouldn't be for a dairy barn or hog pens. And so, I'm just trying to, put this together. I mean, I like the concept. I understand what's going on here, but on the other hand, I do have to play by the rules. So, I guess in the long run, I'm looking at the project, which I like the idea, but then I'm looking at the guidelines that are here in the code, and I'm also looking down the road to the future. If you open up this area for a different kind of use, I'm just wondering if this type of venue is going to disrupt the character of that district. And I don't mean, I'm not being disrespectful to what you want to do with your business, but I'm just wondering, are we opening up, quote, the barn door to other types of businesses that might actually not be in character with the district? I mean, people go out there for quiet, just as you started out originally. And if you have this for a wedding venue, I don't see that as particularly noisy or a problem per se. But then I'm wondering, if we open it up for this, do we open it up for other types of Wild West barn dancing, and somebody else decides they want to take their 5 acres and do the same thing? And if you allow, once you start opening that door, where do we go from here? And that's just a long-range outlook that I'm projecting.
To respond to that, if you look in the GU, one of the conditional use uses that are allowed as a conditional use permit only is a church. And as Mr. Strickland has already pointed out to you, that is a similar type assembly use. If you could, if you are having an issue with being able to fit this use with one of the particular uses that are listed in the zoning district, I'm looking at the GU, for example, then, as Chelsea's already mentioned, you could make the recommendation to City Council to amend the code. And if a church is allowed as a conditional use, maybe Mr. Strickland's proposed use could be approved for the same process. But that would have to be, that would be your interpretation and your recommendation to City Council.
That's the old code. New code doesn't require that for churches.
A church is required in the code right now a conditional use permit is required for most churches depending on their size. If it's in a residential zoning district, it's automatic.
400.
Automatic a permit where it's required, conditional use permit.
Right.
But it's commercial zoning district is where we made some alleviation from the code. That could be one way to go about it.
And if we were to do that, that means that that business that would be it. You know what I'm saying? How would we prevent something from starting that we really don't want to do out there? That's my question to you. I mean, I think this is a great concept, a good business, but on the other hand, do you really want to go down that road to, this type of, call it entertainment or something like that? What's to prevent, say, 10 or 15 years down the road that someone goes in there and says, we want to have a country bar out there. We want to have a gathering place where we're just going to have a bar, maybe a little restaurant out there, because you do have this big building which is going to be designed for that type of thing, could be converted very easily into that type of thing. And I realize I'm going a little bit over the edge here, but that's what I meant by in keeping with the character of the district. And that's my problem. That's where I'm at. Not the concept of the business that he's got or his intention to do that, but I'm looking down the road at that.
Your interpretation would have consequences for any property that has the zoning district. Yes. Your interpretation would have consequences for similar uses anywhere else in the city that has the same zoning district. You're right.
Okay, good. Member Baker.
I'd like to applaud you for coming up with this because I think it is something that would be very successful. I have a problem with this project being in the OR. However, in the GU, I don't have a problem with it really because you've already talked about raising fish, which is one of the things here, and the sale of agricultural products is allowed in the GU. And I started looking at other possible zoning districts, and the only thing that really came close in the code was the recreation and commercial amusement outdoor, and that's not a good fit either. I mean, from what I was looking at. So I think this may be the best, in my opinion, the GU may be the best fit for you, especially since you're going to be living on the property, and you certainly meet the 3 acres for every house restriction there. So I would think rezoning to GU, and like you said, it would have to pass the OR not being what's the word I'm looking for?
Wetland.
Yes, being wetlands, being something that's there
That's
for.
not an issue, but they'll find that out
Right.
when they look at the map.
Okay, but that would be my opinion. That's what I will vote for, is to have it rezoned GU. I think you would fall into these categories for that reason.
When you, I'm sorry, when you went back and researched.
She's listening.
Okay. When we researched the OR, and when I came in and paid Hank Evans a pretty good nickel to come in before the city and rezone that property, there shouldn't even be an OR there. I don't understand. We've come up with a real stumbling block or issue on the OR when we changed that zoning on that proposed subdivision that never occurred back to GU, and why the OR remains, I don't understand. It should all be GU, just like it was all GU when they walked through the door and asked to be annexed into the city. So I may have made an improper assumption, but I'm contending that OR is improper here, and it should all be GU just like it was before it was annexed in.
Okay, moving on. Member Ritchie.
I tend to agree with Member Baker. The OR I kind of have a trouble with, but I think the GU would fit. I do have a question for staff. The community service, wouldn't this be considered a community service for because he's providing a service to the community to offer, rental space for weddings and parties and stuff. So.
The community service definition in the code is primarily for public use. So a type of, and here I can read out the definition for you. And a community service is a use of public, nonprofit, or charitable nature providing ongoing education, training, counseling to the general public on a regular basis without a residential component. Facilities used for recreational, social, educational, library, meetings, and cultural activities open to the public. Activities which include but are not limited to museums, gallery exhibitions, or works of art, or library collections of books, manuscripts, etc. For preservation, study, and reading. Community service activities do not include commercial galleries. Accessory uses include recreational facilities, meeting rooms, and offices and storage facilities used by staff. So this is generally supposed to be for a non-profitly owned and operated organization, the facility for the community, for the benefit of the community, and not any kind of commercial-related business.
But like you said, though, it does provide for churches and such, which I know a lot of churches do charge for people to rent the hall for weddings and such, so I would think that this would qualify under general use.
As a conditional use or permitted?
Well, the permitted use would be for what he's going to use the barn for himself. That would be his primary use, but then he could use it as a accessory or a conditional use.
The issue though is we'd have to ask you to identify how, if you did a motion, for example, for the use and finding it consistent with the zoning district, we'd need some kind of language that would identify this particular use, however it's described to you, consistent with this use or assemblage of uses within that zoning district. Because later on, if we get a similar request, we're going to have to apply the same interpretation.
Right. I don't know how to word it.
Okay. Well, I mean, I don't think we're quite there just yet, so.
We did it with the zoning interpretation letter that we initially gave Mr. Strickland, which is on page 79 of your packet. So the
And
question
that
is,
was
do you agree
approved.
with that or dispute it? And if you dispute it, is there another use that's more appropriate?
I would go along with the rest of them. I think it's GU.
Okay. With a consensus coming in towards the GU, somewhere along the line, I'm still going to find out why that OR wasn't wiped out when I came in and paid to do a zoning change on that. But even with that being said, if I'm hearing what staff is saying, if I came in and applied to change the zoning from OR to GU, then this board still has to make a decision that what I'm proposing is consistent with the GU. And before I spend thousands of dollars again to come in and ask for a zoning change, I would still need a comfort level that you guys confirm and agree that this type building would be appropriate in the GU.
I
If
mean,
that makes sense.
Yeah, and we'll get there. And as you can tell, I've already heard 3 members already pretty much say that.
I'm hearing the same thing.
So, okay. Let's do this real quick. We are. That's why I want to move on, and because I know we've had you up here. I wanted you up here a lot because I
Good
wanted.
conversation.
It's
I needed you to understand.
well, you're the applicant, and you have that right, and we want to make sure that you're heard, and then we're hearing you and understanding that. So, next card, Sid.
I'm glad first, my name is Sid Chahayeb. I'm with Consulting Civil Engineers, 3650 Bobby Lane. I'm glad I let Bo speak first, because he knows about the property, and as he said, it's 250-acre property, okay? And you will notice that the GU portion of the property is most likely, it's like about 85% of the property or 90%. Now, my thinking while I was sitting down listening to the board talk about the use of the OR, and there is something in there about special exceptions, with the OR, and as an accessory structure, or why can't we? This is 250 acres. Why can't we use part of the OR as part of the accessory structure for the GU? I mean, this is one piece of property. It's not 2 pieces.
Well, I can answer that. I mean, this is part of the. You got to remember, OR requires a conditional use permit.
Right.
And so, if we said that that was acceptable, you would have to literally go in for a conditional use permit for parking, because that's where your parking is at. So.
Or we can go through the rezoning.
And then the rezoning might be a cheaper option, or more better option, a more surefire option, I think. But that's just my opinion.
And Member Baker mentioned about the clubhouse that's allowable, in something like this. In the clubhouse, always you have weddings, and this could be. Although you don't have a golf course, but let's say you phase a golf course. It's a paperwork for the golf course. You can phase. You say, okay, well, I'm going to put this first and then put the golf course. But this is not something. A golf course is not going to go there. It's going to be I asked Mr. Strickland to buy 5 acres from him. He said, no way. So. What I'm saying is, this is one piece of property. It's for a family business, and that's the only thing that I'm looking at. And what we're going to do is a site plan for this. And if there is a place of where there is wetland, of course we're not going to go through the wetland, or we have to meet all the regulations when we come in for a permit. So if it's in an OR, why is it put as an OR like this, open recreation like this? I really don't know. But if there is an OR, is there a actual definition of an OR? Like a definition of why it was, put in as an OR?
The vice chair already read the purpose and intent, so that's the definition or the purpose of the OR, and that is to establish the conservation and protection of sensitive lands.
Is there conservation areas within the site? And this could be determined during the process of a site plan review with the city.
Okay. Are there any questions? None? Okay. Do we have any other cards?
Alan Kiesel?
Good evening. My name is Alan Kiesel. I'm the architect on the project. I have offices at 213 Broad Street here in the downtown. From what I'm hearing, it sounds as if you're leaning towards the GU designation being possibly consistent with what we're proposing. Much of what is in the building design is dictated primarily by code. That for a certain number of people, we need a certain amount of bathrooms, a certain amount of space for each individual person under an assembly occupancy. As Mr. Strickland said, he's got 250 acres out there. I mean, he just mentioned that he was harvesting timber out there. His intention is to put a fish farm. There's the possibility of equestrian uses being out there at some point in the future. So I think that if you kind of walk the path down there, I think that this event center could be a benefit to the community. It is open to the public. It could be used as an art gallery, an exhibit space, a wedding venue, a place to hold small parties. And it's in a rural setting with ponds and forests and in a very rural setting. And I think it would be a very big benefit to the city. And if there are any questions.
Your question?
Not necessarily for him, but
Okay.
I'm just,
All right.
sorry. Private parks, this is an OR, private
not.
parks.
Thank you.
And privately owned recreation areas similar to golf courses. If you've got a privately owned recreation area, you can rent that out, correct?
Yes. In fact, even D, I think, really, subparagraph D covers that. General recreational activities by individuals, including hunting and fishing areas, boating activities, hiking areas, walking areas.
Well, that 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, those
That would
aren't
apply
in a
here.
building.
Okay.
Those doesn't seem like they're in a building, but a privately owned recreation area, that would possibly have a building. I mean, I would think that would fit in there, in OR.
If that is your interpretation, I've got to ask you, what examples would that be? I mean, they put in similar to golf courses and tennis clubs.
Somebody has a privately owned recreation area, if somebody has a recreation area, I can't really think of anything local that really, I'm just trying to make this
I
work.
could be a jokester here a little bit, but I'm an old redneck. I'd rather have one of those Frisbee golf courses than the putting kind of golf course. Now, we can put that in where we throw a Frisbee in the basket. And that could be a recreational golf course.
If I may, one possible example could be what Mr. Strickland said earlier about the uses out at Sand Lake Park, a small pavilion that sort of morphed and became more of an entertainment venue and an event venue that is associated with a public park.
Sand Lake.
Well, you're talking about
Sorry,
Fox Lake,
Park.
but
My mistake, Fox Lake.
Yeah, well,
the
Fox,
same can happen.
well, Fox Lake does have
That's
the,
public,
That would be an example.
the
but-
pavilion that gets rented out for
Correct, and
weddings
that
and
would be a
parties. I
public-
mean, that would be the same thing, wouldn't it?
Except it's not enclosed.
It's not
and
enclosed.
air-conditioned
But it fits into his definition of nonprofit.
and- Yeah.
It is also owned and administered by the county.
But they do charge to rent out that
I believe they
facility.
do charge a fee.
Yes.
Yeah, but aren't there some additional problems with that? When you get down here to accessory uses, the clubhouse is accessory to the principal use when this is actually going to be the principal use under OR. And then you have the issue of the one dwelling unit. Well, he's already said he and his family are going to be living there. So that's why to me.
Not on that property, not on that particular piece.
But on the two, yeah.
On the entire, yeah, on
Yes,
the,
ma'am.
So that's why I think GU is a better fit than the OR is, and that's why he could, as long, especially to me, unless you change things drastically from my point of view, especially if you have some agriculture on there and you have this event center, to me, I think you're golden under GU. I mean, that's how I'm looking at it. I'm just saying.
Okay. Vice Chairman Shabir.
I don't know why I'm having a problem with this, but it's, I like the concept of the business, but have you contacted any of the neighbors or surrounding properties on this particular project?
No, sir.
Is there a requirement for that?
No.
No,
Interpretation.
Remember, again, this would apply to all GU or OR properties within the city if you make a
Okay.
decision.
We could put conditional use on this, is that correct?
If you
We could
use
restrict-
OR.
You can't make an interpretation with conditions. If that's what you're getting at. What you can do is your interpretation has to be very specific to what is being, this is what we recommend, is it be your interpretation, like if you recall the boat manufacturing business that came here and you had to do an interpretation is whether that was consistent with the planned industrial development zoning district. Well, as the use was proposed and as the boat process was manufactured, kind of set the definition of what that use is and how you interpret it to be consistent with that zoning district. You could apply the same set of standards in your interpretation of whether this use is consistent with any one of these particular zoning districts. So I think if you just really need to ground down as to what exactly Mr. Strickland is proposing here and how it fits into one of or more of the uses that are listed here in these zoning districts. But you couldn't put standards or conditions on that. That would have to be something that would be done through a code change.
Okay. Thank you.
Dr. Faison.
I'm concerned about the ORA, at which point in time the ORA was established, property being annexed into the city. In the past, it carried the zoning that it had when it came in, as it had in the county. Do we have a record of when it became the ORA?
Yes, it was an ordinance that was adopted in 2005. And that was just after when it was annexed. It was annexed and the land use was changed on the property and rezoned through the same actions, same meeting.
All right. Are you good? Dr. Faison?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm having some problems. I'm all stuffed up here, so
All right, so that was the last card.
Yes.
All right, so we'll close this to the public.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Did you want to speak, sir? If you,
For something.
okay. Okay. All right, so here's my thoughts. We talked about it before. I'm sure that when this originally came in, it was for conservation use. And I say that because I was on this board back then. And I bet you if you go back to the original paperwork, you're going to see you're going to see that. The front looks a little different. It may be that this isn't wetlands. I mean, you've looked at the land, but keep in mind, this is 12 years later. And those, I think, are called truth or troop surveys. Truth. That's good for 5 years. Within 5 years, wetland can die completely. I'm not saying that happened. I'm just saying that there may be some circumstances of that front portion. Maybe they wanted to preserve for something else. Maybe there was something there that's just not there anymore. It's irrelevant in that regard. But what is relevant is the code and what we're looking at. And that's the difference between OR and GU. When I look at OR, I still try to look at it as, conservation sometimes, but I'm trying to change my thinking. But when I look at it in this particular case, it really doesn't fit. And it can fit, but if it does fit, and if we say, hey, that's not a problem, the first requirement is you got to get a conditional use permit for that portion. That's what I see in the code. Now, if we say, fine, general use, and then what I'm hearing from everybody, the general use is acceptable for this, then we're good. The one thing that I think that we should look at changing the code to is redefining on an event center such as this, because this is truly how I look at this. This is more of a convention center style that looks like a barn. It's not a barn that is used like barn song, I think is. Are they in the county? And is that GU?
That use is the bird song.
Bird song, yeah, sorry, barn song.
That facility is in the county.
Yeah.
We actually reached out to the county, inquire how that was permitted. And what we found out was that they had to send a letter to the property owners to, apparently it wasn't approved through the county. So we're not sure how that was established.
But it is.
We couldn't use it as an example.
I say this is a general use there, because now it's an accepted, the county is basically accepted it.
But it's not. They didn't inform the county what the intended use was, and it's not zoned for that.
But that's what I'm saying is that how long has that been around? The county had an actual problem with it, and they read different in the code, or they interpreted it differently. They would have come down and they would have fined them. They would have put code violations on them and shut them down, or
Your staff just informed them the other day, though, so they haven't had time to respond to that.
That's correct.
got them in trouble.
I didn't say a word.
Oops. But I actually, and I'll tell you this, I actually considered going there for my wedding venue, but I like AC, so.
There you go. And restrooms.
Yep. So.
All those are important things. I don't know how a bride would change in the portal.
No. I didn't hear that. No. All right, so I'm looking at general use as something that is, it kind of slides in and it fits in my interpretation of this. But I do think that we need to look at addressing the code on this to say, look, if you're going to have an event or an assembly, that you need to have so many acres of land. Obviously, you have plenty of room, okay? But there's other areas that don't, so we need to address other areas and say you have to have a minimum of, 10 acres or, for something like that to put some type of event center on. But we have to be very careful about this because this isn't a convention center. We would end up changing the code to say you can put convention centers in general use. And that's why I say, you have to be careful when we're interpreting this. But as far as I see, if you move forward as is, you would need a conditional use for OR. And I don't find that as an acceptable fit because of, in OR it says you have to have, for residential, it says you have to have 5 acres for one residence. In GU, you have to have one for every 3. and I'm not trying to interpret to say, well, you have to be more conservative in OR, but the intent is it's heavier in OR. At the same time, it does have the same language, is that it's not considered a holding, but since then we've moved off that and we actually put conservation on there, correct? Where it says conservation.
The north part of the area has the conservation land use on it.
Yes. And in the past, we didn't use that. We used this to do that. I did this. It was interesting, is when you were reading out, if you pointed out, you were literally reading what I had highlighted. Because that's what I was using to interpret this to say, is this acceptable or not? And GU seems to be more acceptable because it says for recreational areas. It says that you can have a building as an accessory use, but then it comes down and it says, where is it? It talks about churches. So then I'm looking at that and I'm saying, well, look, if we can have churches in general use, which I know we do, it's saying that you can have assembly of a large amount of people on general use and it's acceptable. We know that we already do that with golf courses. Okay, they assemble it in the clubhouse, so they can have private parties there. They can. I mean, everything seems to work just fine for a golf course. I got married at Royal Oaks, or not Royal Oaks, but gosh, I better hope my wife doesn't listen. I got married at Laceda Country Club, you know. So I do appreciate, I think this is a very good idea. And so I do see general use as more of it is an accepted use, but I do think we need to redefine this. But if you move forward with OR, I think you should look at a conditional use permit. My interpretation, not the board's. Vice Chairman.
Yeah, I agree. I think we need to have conditional use on this because while wedding sounds great, and I appreciate that, and I like that concept, there's nothing here to say that it couldn't be used from some other kind of event. And I think that you need to have noise requirements, operating times, when you're going to be able to do this within a certain frame rate of hours and all that. So I think that needs to be worked out before. And I think that needs to be part and parcel of what we're doing here. This is because this is not in keeping with that district. We really are introducing something totally different here.
Are you referring to both districts or one in particular?
GU.
GU, okay.
Yeah. So my point is, you know, here again, I like the concept. I'm not opposed to it. But I do think that we need to seriously look at this with a little bit more detail. Because once you do this, as you said, it'll affect other people who want to come in and do this. And if you uses and structures which are in keeping with the character of the district. So we're going to change the character of the district. That's basically what you're doing here by approving this. So I really think it should be a conditional use. And we should be more specific about what we want and what we're going to allow in this.
That would be a code change then, it sounds like to me. Is what you would be recommending as far as allowing this, and I'm going to page 76 of your packet, where I put in there banquet facility / event center would be permitted as a conditional use permit in the GU zoning district. And then, based on Commissioner Williams' interpretation, would be on page 85. In the OR zoning district, it would be considered as a conditional use permit under the existing use under section 59-644C, other uses associated with a site-specific evaluation. Is that where you're going, Mr. Chairman? And okay.
Yeah, I like I said, I like the concept, but here again, I know how these things go. And you want to be careful because of the character of this district. You don't want to open this up to just anything, create some serious problems going forward, because then you'll change everything. So I think you have to be careful with that.
Can you expand that a little bit? What is it you would be
Well,
concerned about?
my point is you would be opening up, you might want to come up, you'd be opening this up to other kinds of businesses. Now, if you're doing weddings and things like that, you may have a contract for 1 a month, 2 a month, 3. You know, it's not an everyday event. You may go for months without one. I doubt it. Once you get your reputation going, you'll be pretty busy. So my point is, if that works for you, and I'm sure it will, then you have other people trying to do the same type of thing with a business that is not so perhaps compatible.
Yeah, I'm not interested in.
You're not, but I'm just saying.
If I'm hearing what you're thinking without saying it, I'm not interested in strip clubs or all of these other kind of things out here. I'm on the other end of the stick with wedding venues and churches and those kind of things out in that area.
No, I understand that, and I understand what you're trying to do, and I like what your concept.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I was following.
Right, but you just want to make sure that going forward, okay, that someone else doesn't come along with another 5 acres and say, hey, that's a great idea, but totally different. Totally different.
Would this be part of the conditional, the limitations that you're placing on that use? And I have not heard any limitations that upset me within the conversation being had here. The only thing that I'm hearing at this point is we're much more comfortable with the GU zoning, and if we want to take and do a conditional use permit with that GU zoning, then I haven't heard anything that upsets me about that. But I don't want to put one foot in the door and start down the road spending money and then find out that later on the road we chose to go down is not going to work for other people. I want to know that this board is okay and has defined under a GU, this is what we're looking for, and then we can support that kind of project for this property.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So how would we, here's my issue with, hold on, let me find OR. Under OR, I'm definitely not wanting to change the code because it says conditional use permit, I'm good with that. Under GU, I'm thinking, well, okay, that raises the bar on that, and because I was kind of looking at this as a little differently, that it wasn't going to be conditional use. I'm trying to look at the definition in here again, because the reason why I'm saying that is under OR it talks about, under OR it says you can have private parks, privately owned recreation areas similar to golf courses, tennis clubs, which provide outdoor recreational activities for club members and or the public. Under GU, I'm not, it says public and private parks, recreation areas, and it just says, yeah, I got recreation areas, game preserves. So am I to take the definition from OR and apply that to GU under recreation areas? On page 82, under 59-622D is where I'm referring to. Okay? It says public and private parks, recreation areas, and game preserves. That's it. It's on page 84, under section 59-642, it gives a more concrete definition. It says private parks, privately owned recreation areas similar to golf courses, tennis clubs, which provide outdoor recreational activities for club members and or to the public. And so originally what I was doing was I was taking that definition from OR and applying it to GU. And so I was saying, well, you know, if it's acceptable in OR, which is supposed to be more stringent, am I wrong in my analysis?
So let me follow. You're utilizing the language that's in the OR as a means of interpreting what the paragraph in the GU is saying, but you're
About
not
recreational
suggesting
areas.
changing. I'm sorry?
About recreational, the definition of recreational areas from
Okay.
OR.
Okay, so but you're not suggesting changing the code.
Well,
in
I think
particular
that,
case.
I think you need to expand that.
Okay.
I mean, pretty much we're already recommending changing the code. But I'm saying I'm applying that definition as recreational areas.
Okay.
What is the board thinking on that? Is that how you're interpreting it as well or not? So what is your definition of recreational areas for general use?
For the OR, where it says private parks and privately owned recreation areas, and it goes on to talk about for club members. And that's not really, to me, what this is at all. And further down under accessory uses, where it says A1, it says one dwelling unit may be provided for each park as long as you have at least 5 acres. So you're still limiting the property to one house.
Well, but see, where I'm changing that is because it says or the public. So I'm just saying, fine, it's a private venue for the public, and they're going to be charging for it.
Right, but see, I don't have a problem with GU saying public and private parks, it's just not as many words.
Yes, but I'm saying it's not a park. It's how are we determining recreational areas? Well, the uses is what I'm trying to get at.
Right, right.
Because it's key. If you're saying GU is okay, then you need to be able to defend that on saying, well, you should be able to defend that the use is acceptable. I'm saying that the definition, I'm expanding the definition for recreational areas that you see.
And I guess what I'm doing is I'm adding, that's why I told him as long as he has some agricultural in there, I feel like it's a better fit.
But he could always subdivide. I mean, I'm not trying to do the what ifs, but it's not about you, it's about the code, okay?
I understand, but I can't just subdivide.
Well, it's not that easy, but it is doable.
On page 79, that's the interpretation letter we initially gave to Mr. Strickland. If you look on the third paragraph, public and private parks, recreation areas, and game preserves are permitted uses in the GU zoning district. And then we went on to say, repeat, for the private parks, privately owned recreation areas, similar to golf courses and so on, are permitted uses in the OR zoning district. So we looked at both those particular sections which you are talking about right now.
Well, so you're interpreting, okay.
So we're asking, do you agree with that? And if not, is there a different use?
Okay, so, and that's what I'm saying is, yes, I agree with the definition. I do. But that's what I was asking.
I have a question, Christine.
Okay. Sorry. Go ahead.
I have a question for you. Would this come under catering and banquet? I mean, is this basically what we're getting down to here?
Well,
as a venue for.
I would defer to the architect. My understanding is this is classified as a banquet facility. And so that's what we put into the agenda item on page 76. We look at this as a banquet facility / event center. And that's a banquet facility as per the building code.
If I may, the kitchen that we're proposing in the building itself is a catering kitchen. There will be warming drawers and a 3-compartment sink and tables, but the food would be brought in by caterers from the outside and kept warm in this kitchen and then served to the guests.
Yeah.
It's not a commercial kitchen per se.
Well, even if it, what would it matter?
Well,
They got a commercial kitchen down the road at Fox Lake. They do their cooking there.
They do at Sandpoint too, so.
How would that enter the picture? in terms of this being a venue for weddings and entertaining guests for a wedding, where does this catering and banquet enter the picture at all, or is that to be considered?
It would certainly be a facility where it could be used for banquet facilities. I mean, it's a banquet hall, basically, is how we have looked at it. And according to my understanding, the building code, that's how they.
So would that have to be changed in the code? Would that have to be one of the permitted uses?
Well, that could be. If you don't agree with our interpretation on page 79 of the initial letter that we gave to the applicant, then you could certainly, as you already discussed, propose a recommendation to City Council to amend the code to allow the specific use in the zoning district, either as a permitted use or as a conditional use.
But we would be, I'm just talking this through, okay? We would be opening this up then, is that correct? We would be expanding the use of that building if we specifically mentioned catering and banquet. Is that correct?
This is how we look at this as initially. If you go to page 79, this is what we thought we were getting, and this is how we interpreted it. But when we had a meeting and a discussion with Mr. Strickland, with his architect, we looked at this more, as you see on page 76 of your packet, where we identify as a banquet facility, an event center, which we would see as a little more intense than a barn that would be used intermittently for wedding events. But
And I think that's where I'm running into a little bit of a problem here, okay, about fitting this in, with the conditional use. How are we going to, he wants to use it for a venue for weddings, okay, I get that. That's fine. But then how do we, can you limit the use to that extent, or do you have to open this up to banquet and catering?
One recommendation that I may provide, based on your conversation that I heard earlier, talking about the conditional use process, I heard some of the board members suggesting that was a direction they would feel comfortable going in, and I heard the comparison about this structure being compared to a church. The church is listed in GU as a item in the conditional use process that this could be likened to. You could recommend that the council amend the code to list something like a banquet facility under the conditional uses of GU that would accommodate this applicant's request. It's just one possibility that you could determine is appropriate.
Based on what you just said, okay, would that allow the applicant to expand this building and go beyond what he's recommending?
Ultimately, if the code is amended, the council would have the ultimate discretion on how the code is amended, and they could define it based on this or how they think that the code would be appropriate for the fitting of the GU zoning district. So I can't say for certain how it would end up, because there's more steps to that process than this board. You could make a recommendation, but that's what that would be.
Yeah, basically, we interpret it, but that's where we stop. All right,
But even as a church, let's just say, hey, I'm going to put a cross on top of this thing and call it a church. What it goes on in a church in terms of every church I've ever been into has a commercial kitchen to where they can have breakfasts and other things within their congregation. They have speakers that come in and go through that kind of stuff. I'm not interested in expanding this to get to things that don't belong in my residential neighborhood. All I'm looking to do is to be able to share for a wedding and parties and those kind of venues, nature out there that I have out there without disrupting my neighbors or anybody else, because I've got enough property. That's where I'm trying to get to.
I think
understand you're
we're
trying
there.
to protect.
I do. I mean, this isn't, because it's not, this isn't just your property. I think, in my belief, I think what you're doing is acceptable to the code, to GU, okay? And where I'm trying to go with this is, okay, how do we make this fit future developments, okay?
And I'm good with just what you said.
Oh, you like that?
I'm okay with that. That's where I'm trying to get to as well.
I agree. I mean,
But
if
I'm
I was...
an old man and I'm not going to be around too many more years, so
Okay.
let's go.
Here's my thoughts.
But your family want to do barn dancing in a bar later on.
At my funeral.
And I'm unsure if we should, I'm really unsure about doing a conditional use permit on the GU, only because every time we do conditional use permits, you do one, you do them all. It is literally impossible to say no to a conditional use permit anymore. You have to justify your no, and when you've already said yes before, you open up the city to lawsuits. So I'm seeing the city migrate against them. I'm watching the city migrate away from conditional use permits to a certain degree. Am I wrong in that? You called it an undue burden before, so.
It's true. I mean, certain uses that if you can meet the conditions, there's no, inherent reason to really ask for them to go through a quasi-judicial process.
Right.
But obviously, there are those particular uses that may have unintended consequences, like a very large church, or even a church located in a residential area.
So I'm trying to get on board with the city. I'm trying to get on board with your line of thinking, and at the same time, I believe that if we put in stipulations on there, and we say, fine, we agree that for this time in period, the intent is met under GU, not under OR. That's where I'm at. That's what I'm agreement with. But for future code, I think we should make a recommendation to say, let's request that they amend the definitions here and put some stipulations in there. Because here's why. How can we say he needs to go to a conditional use permit when it's not in the code for him to use a conditional use permit?
Correct. If that's your direction, we would have to amend the code.
Right. Yeah. But I'm saying that right now he's using the code now. We can't expect him to have to go through a conditional use process.
However, if your interpretation is that the use that he's described does not meet any of the definitions that are provided as permitted, then it would fall under the prohibited category as something that's not fitting within the zoning district. And until that CUP amendment to the code is provided for him, then he would have an avenue to pursue the CUP.
And that's why I'm saying that is not an option, in my opinion. So I believe that the intent is met under GU, but we request to modify the code to basically a stopgap to make sure that if somebody wants to come in and they have 1 acre of GU land, okay, they say, I want to put up a banquet center here, and you're surrounded by residential estates, or it's not acceptable to the area. You have the ability to say, sorry, you don't fit. And that's where I'm trying to get with this, because
that's where I'm dancing around. That's my concern, because
if this board thinks that the presentation that was made tonight, and again, Brad mentioned the boat facility that you previously did, where certain conditions were applied and that were described in the applicant's presentation, that was in an enclosed, closed molding facility. Those were unique to that presentation you heard. Tonight you heard a presentation about a 255-acre property that is going to be used with one principal structure that is going to be used for large-scale facility, as a large-scale facility that will include a kitchen. You may decide that the public and private parks, recreation areas, and game preserves, as was written in the city staff letter, is an item that is a permitted use that could be interpreted to also include a banquet hall with a minimum of X number of acres, perhaps, or with a maximum number of structures on that building. Those criteria that you heard tonight could be included in your motion to say that that interpretation would be acceptable with that criteria.
But let me add, that would require a code change. I mean,
Yes.
that's something that's part of your
So
recommendation. We
what
would
if we
take that.
did, maybe I'm trying to think outside the box. We make two motions. One motion is to say, yes, we feel this is compatible. Second motion is, we believe that there should be a code change on this for general use. And that would wrap it up tighter so that he can move forward without there being anything left in the wind. Does that sound,
You can do that. That's your directive.
does that sound
Does that,
appropriate?
does that protect the character of the district? I mean, are we opening up something else here that we shouldn't be? Or could possibly interpret it going forward that's...
If I to understand, what you're saying is that, and if you follow me, page 76 of your packet, that's the first page of this agenda item. A banquet facility / event center is a permitted use and consistent with the GU zoning district as we stated in the initial letter on page 79, but would have to be approved as a conditional use in the OR zoning district because that would be considered an other uses associated with site-specific evaluation. Is that correct?
Are you on 76?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll start over again. So on page 76 of your packet, on the first paragraph there, under summary explanation of background, we've gotten there in a description of your interpretation powers, and then in that same paragraph, we're asking for you to determine whether a banquet facility / event center, in quotation marks, is a permitted use in the GU and OR zoning districts. And so, based on discussion I'm hearing tonight, if you go to page 79 of your packet, that's the initial letter that we gave to Mr. Strickland. The third paragraph of that letter states that section 59-622D, public and private parks and recreation areas and game preserves are permitted uses in the GU zoning district. In other words, we're saying that this banquet facility and event center is consistent with that particular subparagraph D, public and private parks and recreation areas in the GU zoning district. If that's true, then I'll go on to the next part. In the OR, it sounds to me what you're saying is that a banquet and event center can only be approved as an other use according to page 85 of your packet, the OR zoning, as a conditional use. And that is section 59-644C, other use.
So here's the thought.
Okay.
So there's clarity as well in the future. We give our reasonings, we put it in the minutes, and we say, we believe that this is consistent with the intent of the code, provided that it has 200 acres plus in the minutes, not, we're saying that because there's so much land here, it meets.
That is a standard that you couldn't apply here.
I'm not,
Yeah.
but what I'm trying to get at is.
Or condition, rather. You could.
I'm basically saying, well, yeah, you're right. You're right.
And please understand that when I go to a lender to do this, I will not be encumbering the entire 200 plus acres
I know.
under that. It will be lots 19, 20, and 21 that would be under a mortgage, allowing that, even though that is still part of the 255
Now
acres.
keep in mind, and this is what you got to remember too. So my intent, what I'm looking at tonight, is going ahead and try and do two motions. One wraps up you, the other one tries to fix the code for future.
Down the road.
My thing is whether it be 10 acres or more. Now, if your property doesn't meet 10 acres or more, then you're out of compliance with the code. You're, what's the name of the, what do you call that when you don't match the code? You're non-conforming with the code. And so my intent, what I'm looking at, is to expand that to say you got to have at least a chunk of land to be able to use this. Okay? So if we don't, let's just say that we move forward on this, the back end is going to bite you, because if there's an issue, your lender is not going to, you're going to be hurting when it comes to if there's something that happened to the property.
19, 20, and 21 is 10.708.
All right, so 10 acres is, well, that's good. That's my thinking, but I mean, it could be more, but I'm just saying that. So what is staff's thoughts about what I'm bringing up? What is the board's thoughts about what I'm bringing up? I think 10 acres is a substantial piece of land for GU.
So that would be your recommendation? So two motions or one motion, however you want to do it?
Two motions.
Okay.
Well, it depends on who's making the motion, because I can't make a motion, but.
But your second part of your motion, or the second motion, would include a recommendation to City Council to amend the
Yes.
GU zoning district to allow banquet facilities?
I would, require banquet facilities with a minimum of 10 lots or 10 acres or more.
As a permitted use or as a conditional use?
Well, I mean, you can make the motion. I mean, I'm not, conditional use is just one more. I'm not totally in agreement with it.
Okay.
I'd like to close it up somehow if that's going to get us there.
Well, your recommendation would be just that. It doesn't have to state whether it's conditional use.
Yeah, I mean.
You could leave it how you, the council decide.
Okay. Is the board agreeable to this?
Can you state the motion just as you're preparing it? I mean,
We're going to state the motion.
How you're writing it, not the motion. What I mean is, how are you writing this up at the present time?
Depends on how you make your motion.
Okay.
Well, here are my notes. Here, I could tell you, I can repeat my notes that I have based on the discussion I've heard so far, and you can reword it as part of your motion or come up with a different one if you like, if that works. Okay. My understanding is that you would find that a banquet facility and event center would be consistent with the GU under paragraph 59-622D, a public and private parks recreation areas. And a banquet facility and event center can be permitted under the OR only under paragraph 59-644C. Other uses associated with a site-specific evaluation. And then you would recommend to City Council to amend the code to allow banquet facility and event center in the GU zoning district with a minimum of 10 acres.
Did you want to ask a question?
I'm not quite sure.
Okay. Well, so we'll go ahead. I don't
Are
want
we talking about two different recommendations here? Or are we
Yes.
talking about the recommendations for him to change his situation to a GU? And where is this other one coming in from? He's here to see if he can change his situation with building this unit under the code, the GU code, right? All right. That's one recommendation, right?
It is my understanding the recommendation would be from the commission, based on your discussion so far as what I've heard, is that a banquet facility would be consistent in the GU as we initially interpreted it, as a park and a private park or recreation facility
Yeah.
in the GU. That's one part of the
All right.
discussion I'm hearing. And then would be allowed, a banquet facility would be allowed in the OR zoning, but only as a conditional use as listed as one of the conditional use permit uses in that zoning district.
Come on up. Yeah, it'd be better if you get up there.
I get in trouble if I'm not. Based upon that, with what you just read, then what I'm hearing is it would be incumbent upon me, because we're agreeing that this would be allowable in the GU, it would put us in the position of having to do a zoning change on 19, 20, and 21, which is 10.7 acres, to make sure that all of that property, even though part of it is now GU, that all of it would be GU, and that's irrespective, has nothing to do with the OR. I don't want to go down that path, that rabbit hole.
No,
I simply want to address the GU and apply for a zoning change and proceed from
What
there.
this means, though, is basically you have two options now. You can either do a rezoning, or you can get a conditional use permit, and you're legitimate
As a
on that.
business decision, the GU is more consistent with the 85% of the rest of the property, so I'm better off doing that.
True.
And
I'm
that's
just saying
where I
that you
would
have
go.
options if
Great.
we go with this. So what I wanted to bring up real quick was that interesting, I don't know why I wasn't thinking about that, is because we're defining the definitions, if you define one definition in GU, you have to find the same definition in OR, okay? And because of that, because we're talking about the recreational facilities, okay? So you have one in OR that requires a conditional use. You don't think so? Because I'm using the same definition, but I'm bringing it over to fit it.
What I heard earlier was that the recommendation of this commission was to add an additional line item to the permitted uses, describing using the words that was in the staff report, I think it was on page 76.
Yes, but the thing about that is you have to use the definition in OR in GU to do that. And so if you're finding the definition acceptable, then you have to find that same definition is in OR, which then it is applied there as well. You're literally moving that definition from OR to GU, and that's why I'm saying that. Go ahead, I'm listening. So I'm just saying that because you find it acceptable in GU, you have to find it acceptable in OR. I don't think it's a fallacy to make that stretch. And then if OR has a conditional use permit, then a recommendation for future is to just blend them together and say make them both conditional in a future ordinance change. Follow me? No? I'm really good. Sometimes I can be really good with the whiteboard, and I can...
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to ask, would it be possible to take a 5-minute break?
Yes, that'd be good. So
Okay.
let's take a 5-minute break.
Thank you.
Okay, we have everybody here, so let's get started again. And Member Baker, so all right, so here's my thoughts on the defining of this. So we all pretty much agreed that GU is acceptable, okay? And in the definition of GU, it says recreational areas, and that's all it says, right? But when we look at the definition, we're really looking at the definition of OR, and that's kind of, we've expanded that definition. We basically use that. The city staff have used that by saying private parks, privately owned recreation. That is the definition in OR of what they've said. That's why I was saying that we basically said, by saying one, we've said the other was, both districts were acceptable, both zoning categories were acceptable. You follow me?
I think I'm following you.
Because the original definition for GU just says recreational areas. But when you expand that out, and in their definition that they gave us on page 79, it gives you that same exact definition from OR. And so if you're doing that and you're looking at that, you're saying, well, then fine, you're good in OR. All right?
So you want us to make a motion that we take the definition
No.
OR?
We're saying that we believe that it's acceptable, that the intent is being met in this, and it is acceptable, okay? And that's it. That's the first motion. That's really all we need, because that's what's being asked of us. Is it, do they meet the threshold? Do they, are they, can they do what they want to do under this definition? Okay, that's the first one.
The use is consistent.
It is, yeah.
Classification.
Yes. Okay, that's basically what the first motion is. But when you do that, when you do that, that basically says that it's acceptable in both, but under OR they have to get a conditional use permit. Under GU, it's basically permitted. That is the end result of what, by saying yes to this.
Okay, see, I don't quite agree with, I guess, the last part of that. And maybe it's because I don't understand what you're saying fully. But in GU, where it says public and private parks, recreation areas, and game preserves, I feel like he's meeting game preserves out of that, even if he's not meeting the rest of it.
But how's that a game? I don't understand how this would be a game preserve.
I don't understand that.
With all the wildlife that is on the property, because it is.
But that is,
completely
this is not a game preserve. What he's proposing is not a game preserve.
Well, no, he's not proposing a game preserve. He's proposing basically a banquet hall.
Yes.
Which. Private park. Okay, if you want to call it a private park. I guess I'm not.
And I'll tell you why.
And he's talking about agriculture and.
I know, but that's basically a separate thing that he's doing with the rest of the property. That has anything to do with what is before us. That's basically, that's white noise in the background, essentially. We can't really even look at that. We're only looking at the banquet facility on the definition of the code. And that's why I'm saying we are literally applying the definition of OR, because under OR you're allowed to have golf courses, and right, and in golf courses you have facilities that go with that, which fall under recreation. Okay, that's why I'm saying that definition is expanded, because the definition under GU just says recreation areas. Okay. So by agreeing that this is acceptable, you are agreeing that definition in OR is the definition we're really using. And it is put in their language on page 79. That is their interpretation. Now, if I'm completely off base on this, I need to hear now.
The letter
the letter you see in page 79, we applied the same logic.
Okay. And so all I'm saying is, first recommendation, we say, yes, the language is consistent. OR and GU is acceptable for what the intent, and they move forward. Second motion is that we should request that City Council direct staff to modify the code to adjust the OR language and potentially, well, both OR and GU to include the language banquet facilities with a minimum of 10 acres of land with conditional use permits. Now, in your thing, it wouldn't require a conditional use permit because it's before then. If you start now, if you get permitted now, but if you wait, then I don't know. I mean, I think it doesn't fall in there because it's going to take a while for this to go through that. But if you make application, then yours sticks with the code, the current code.
And we've started that, and we meet the 10
But
acre requirement of what you're in the future proposing.
But my point is then you would have to go to a conditional use permit later on. If this passes through with modifications. So if you put in your intent now, you're good.
I'm in the
Okay?
old code.
You follow what I'm saying?
I do.
So for our purposes that we're dealing with, it's just saying, we say, yes, we agree, and then we close the gap for other areas because somebody could have 1 acre of GU and put a banquet facility on it. That's what
Right.
I'm trying to stop.
And I agree with you completely on that.
Or OR.
Or OR.
Right, and I agree with you completely on that. The part I guess I'm not really excited about here is where, and it's very likely just because I don't have the experience that you have in this, and I don't fully see what you're talking about here. But I do not see why we would ever want to do that in OR, really.
Well, so if you look at OR, if you go to the top in OR,
What page are you on?
let's go to page 84, and you're looking at the purpose and intent of OR. If you look at the purpose and intent of that, and it says, basically, it's intended to not function as a holding designation, it's designated to preserve the land and for the natural enjoyment of the city, and it's intended to just implement the goals and objectives and policy of the comprehensive plan. So if you go to page 82, and you look at the definition of general use, you get the same exact definition. And that's why I was saying before, we've changed how we've applied this. When I first got on this board, it was for conservation, and it's not for conservation anymore. So I'm ignoring that. I'm just saying, fine, that's great. I see that, but that's not what we're doing. And here's why we're not doing that. Because if you go farther down into in the code, it basically says, yeah, you can use this, and you can put buildings, and you can put houses, and you can do that on both of them. So it's really not technically conservation. And I believe that is why we kind of changed that.
So you're basically concurring with staff's letter stating that I can build this on the page 79 or the letter they gave me.
I mean, all I am, the board isn't just yet, so. I mean, it's
I agree, I'm just
I
trying to
think
figure
I'm-
out how to word it.
so
Yeah, I think I'm finally understanding what you're getting at here.
essentially, I'm just saying that we've applied these two things differently than what we have in the past. That's why I think you got that configuration that you got. I think when John came back, he changed it to the original, but because it was probably because the OR was placed there under that old logic, those remained, but everything else around it stayed the same. And that's probably what had happened. Okay, so it wasn't anything that John did wrong. He did everything right. It's just that that's the nature of the beast on how things were viewed.
Can I?
Mm-hmm.
It, if you read this, is this current? I mean, I'm assuming that
This is current.
this is current. Okay, so if you go to R, and I keep reading this, and yet I'm not sure I understand what you're saying. It says, it is intended that the district will not function as a holding designation for land, but rather a permanent classification in order to ensure that the present... I'm sorry. In order to ensure that the present and future residents of the city are able to enjoy the benefits of natural environment. So what do we... You're doing just the opposite of what...
Because what I'm saying is, yes, that has that statement in there, okay? And that's what we used to say, and that's what we would... When we wanted to put something in conservation, we would put it in that, okay? And then we came back and we said, how can we put it on the title? How can we, make it more stringent? And then somewhere down the line, we started putting literally conservation on things that made it more permanent so that it was hard-coded for future planners to see. But in the past, they really didn't see that. Interpretations change with staff. They came in and looked at it as, well, okay, that's great. That's nice, pretty fluff, because what this says, and you go farther down into this, it says, well, hey, that's great that it's conservation, but I can put a house on there. I can put a farm on there. Oh, I can't grow my pot, but I can also put, I can put animal care facilities, riding trails, right? Billboards. Is that conservation? You see, so it's truly not conservation when you go down into the code on either one of them. Conservation is basically land that you don't touch. Yeah, you set aside. And we did that in the past through some other means, through something with the title or something, but they would put notes in, I think, right? And is that...
Right, there may be a conservation easement required with a site plan review, some set-aside area. So.
But as far as... Okay.
Now, staff, do you agree with what the chairman's saying about OR? Are you agreeing that we have the flexibility to put other things other than what is listed here? Because I'm looking at A through D and 1 through 5 here, and I don't see where it says anything about being able to put a structure in OR. That's what I'm looking at here. I don't see where it says that we can do that.
Well, what our initial discussions with Mr. Strickland, we looked at it as paragraph B, the barn being utilized for events, which is a structure.
But that's in GU, right?
I'm looking at the OR. This is what you're looking at, correct?
Permitted uses?
Yes.
Okay.
So B, private parks, privately owned recreation areas. And then if you look under accessory uses, clubhouses, it would be an accessory to something like that. So we looked at that as, well, he's asking for a structure to be put there for some events. Clubhouse would be used for some events, catering, banquets, things of that nature. It would be part of some kind of recreational use. It could be a private park. So this is private land being used for private use. But at the same time, it also says that this recreation area is similar to golf courses and tennis clubs, which provide outdoor recreation facilities or activities for club members and or the public. So it's open for interpretation, if you will, as to whether this is strictly just for a private use, he could rent out part or some of his property for recreational use, such as hunting or for trails or for hiking, and then have a clubhouse or a banquet facility on the property as well. And so that's why we issued the letter. But our question is the banquet facility different from what we initially interpreted? We thought that we were going to see a barn for events, but what we got was a plan for a banquet facility. And so we're here to ask you tonight, are we going too far? Is that consistent with the initial interpretation of what we had in our letter, or is it more consistent with the different use that's listed here?
So based on what you just told me, okay, it's okay in GU, but I don't see where it's okay in OR.
Okay, well, in the GU, we had the same question. I mean, you see under page 82, under permitted uses, we used subparagraph D, public and private parks. And again, and recreation areas. And again, public parks and recreation areas can have some kind of lodge or building there that would be used for an assembly of the people who are recreating there.
So are we going down the road here where possibly we're going to use the OR as part of where the structure is going to be? Is that?
Well, Mr. Strickland has indicated that he would like to have his building, where he'd like to have his building, could potentially straddle the boundary of both of those zoning districts. Yes. So that question is, would you find the banquet facility event center, as we've interpreted to be consistent with the GU zoning district and or the OR zoning district?
Well, I think in the GU I can see it, but in the OR, I think if we open this up, this OR to this, I think you might as well just do away with OR and just not have it, because that's the problem going, not just with this property, but with somebody else who comes in and wants to do the same thing. So I don't know. I think that unless you change the zoning, specifically, just go through that process. Because otherwise, I think that this is just not a good idea to just make this accommodation and then have everybody else that comes behind you and saying, well, we have this OR, but everybody else that comes behind us, you did it to this, so we have to do it.
It sounds to me, as far as the OR zoning, you would find it inconsistent with any of the uses permitted or conditional or accessory otherwise in that zoning district. And so therefore would not be permitted, it's not inconsistent with that zoning district, and therefore he would have to move the building as he's originally, from where he originally proposed it, or rezone that part of the property if he's successful to do.
That's what I would say.
Okay.
Here's where I differ on that. Originally, I would say, okay. I agreed that OR shouldn't be used, but then I'm thinking, I could put a whole clubhouse there. And, I actually used to be a lifeguard when I was little younger. And I was a lifeguard at a private club. And, it's a huge club. They had everything there, and they could technically put that on OR. And, it was massive. It would be it would be 3 of our golf clubs in the area or more. So, is there any size limitations on what you can put on OR as in a golf club? On the 255 acres, could he put a 30,000 square foot building on that?
He potentially could.
Yes.
Yeah,
So I'm just saying the intent of the code doesn't limit what you can put on there. It's not a conservation use. It's if you look at, and this is also why I was looking at this, if you look at Royal Oaks, that's GU and OR. It's scattered, okay? So that's why my interpretation of OR, I'm saying if I agree with a weaker definition of GU, and I'm applying the definition from OR, then I have to apply it to both. And if I look at OR saying, look, I could put a massive building on there and it'd be acceptable, and they could have event after event after event, private or public, wouldn't matter. I just don't see at this point in time that it would be a problem. Now, to close that, you say, now let's ask for council to give direction to change the code. But as far as I see, I just don't see, there isn't a huge difference. If he was to put a Lasita on this piece of property and he said, fine, I'll have a putt-putt. I'll put a putt-putt course right there. That would be acceptable under OR. Right? I'm kind of stretching it a bit, but technically if he said, fine, I'm going to have a small, tiny little
We
golf
we wouldn't
course.
find that to be consistent, because that's about outdoor recreation, facility, amusement. There is another category that allows uses like that.
I guess
in other
you
zoning
do have
districts.
that, don't you?
Yeah, that would be a commercial in that,
Even
a
if
strictly
you-
commercial use, in a commercial zoning.
But even if you put a small golf course on there, something tiny, 3-hole, I don't know, but you get my point.
Yes, you could.
And then he could have a convention center, and then that would fall within code. So I'm just saying that, fine, say he meets the intent and fix the code for future and smaller purposes for OR and GU. I don't mean to get on a soapbox on this, but I mean, I just don't, I see there being loopholes in here that it can be fixed, but right now, you know, so, go ahead.
Well, where I'm getting to, when it says OR on page 84 of 88, okay? It's pretty clear. If that first paragraph there expresses the intent of what OR is, then I think we have to stick with that. I don't think we have the flexibility to just say you can go into OR and put any building, any size building that you want in OR. It's according to this, it says it is intended that this district will not function as a holding destination for land, but rather a permanent classification in order to ensure that the present and future residents of the city can enjoy the benefits of natural environment of the city. And it is further intended that the district will implement the goals, objective, and policy of the comprehensive plan. But it's provide for the conservation and protection of sensitive lands. That's what it says. So, you know, you can put some other intent on it, but that's what I read.
What's the future land use on this? Residential?
The future land use is a residential low,
Yeah.
residential 1 specifically, and the OR area has a conservation land use.
Okay.
Do we
Yeah.
have- how much is allowed
Yeah, that's
on OR? I'm sorry. How much can you put on OR?
How
In the co-
much
how-
can you?
how many- a size building? What can you do with OR in the code?
There isn't a limit size building in the OR.
Right, that was what I was.
The code does not establish a maximum lot coverage in OR.
So OR is how do you plan for OR? What I'm saying, if that's the case, then how do you say no to someone who wants to put a structure in OR?
Well,
how does planning department determine that?
by the use, what the use is proposed as, what is being proposed as far as the how the property is going to be used or utilized for. That's how we determine. So I can't throw out hypotheticals to you other than what's being presented to you tonight.
So if someone comes to you and can they say they want to use 90% of something that's designated as OR for a building, and you're going to say, okay.
Well, what is that building? And that's the first question we're going to ask. What are you using that building for? Why do you need that building? It really depends on what's happening. It does. I mean, you see the permitted uses. These are primarily outdoor kind of recreation activities. And if you wanted to put a clubhouse, you could have that ability to do that, depending on the type of recreational activities doing it. But a conditional use, you would have to get that special permit to allow any other type of vertical structure, like a single-family home. Public utilities, roads and bridges, things of that nature. So I think it covers that major structures are probably going to require some kind of special approval process, with the exception of that assembly building with a golf course or tennis facility. So I can't say for sure what, if a particular building is being proposed to us in the OR zoning district, what we would say. It really depends on how that building and how that property is going to be used.
So there's no cutoff percentage of how much of OR you could use for because nowhere in the permitted uses does it mention a building. There's no boating activities, hiking, walkway, mosquito control, stormwater management, outdoor recreational activities for club members. It doesn't say anything about a club or a building. And, a golf course and a tennis course is outdoor. It's not a building. And there's nothing in the permitted uses that mentions a building of any kind. So it does talk about club members using facilities, but they don't say that those facilities are in a building. Golf courses are outside. Tennis clubs are outside.
It would appear to me then that it sounds like you're not finding that this use would be consistent with the zoning district.
According to this. I mean,
Okay.
I'm just reading here
Okay.
what you have. And so I just don't want to open up the door to OR.
So it might be appropriate for you to make a motion that the OR, to clear the air of the OR zoning district and to then move on to GU, to make a motion if you believe that the interpretation that staff made that the OR zoning district does not apply to this use as presented.
That's correct. You can split up the motions and deal with each of these zoning districts individually.
And see where the rest of the commission falls on that idea.
Yep, it's true. Have 3 motions.
What?
So you could do 3 motions. You could divide up GU and divide up OR, and that might be a way to put this to rest.
And then council would, the staff would come up with recommendations? How would you?
First, we'll deal with the interpretation, and then we'll deal with the recommendation. Because the interpretation is what is being presented, and the recommendation is for the future code change. And right now, we have an application and a request for you to interpret both OR and GU, as staff has submitted a letter and then received additional information. What do you think of all of that?
Do we make the motion that we approve the GE designation for this project, for Strickland project? Is that the first one?
Well, no, what he's saying is, now we would do 2 motions. And keep in
Yeah,
mind,
the
he's
second-
got 2 different, he's got OR and GU, so.
If I may. If Mr.
You
Strickland.
come up here.
If I'm understanding where this is ultimately heading, if you made a motion to say that this was consistent with GU, but inconsistent with, what was the other? OR, then Mr. Strickland would still have the opportunity to possibly rezone that OR to GU, and it would still fall within that classification.
Yes.
And then again, following through to the next stage, you would recommend changes to the code to clarify it for projects that come before you in the future.
Now bear in mind that when you rezone that, you also have to change the future land use map, and you have to do rezoning on that.
Let's see if we can do it without the rezoning.
So, yeah, there's 2 things you have to move forward on with that. So it's not as easy when you start picking it apart. And I'm putting out the facts there to you now. If I'm not saying it, they'll tell you tomorrow or today. So, okay. So I think it would probably be, I know we've hashed this out back and forth, and if the commission desires, we can do, I mean, I would like to see a 3rd motion, if not on the code change. If not, I'm willing to pass the gavel and make that motion. But we can do 2 motions if you want, one for OR, one for GU, and then one for changing code. What is the commission's desire? Is there more discussion? Did you?
I think I got it. I'm not sure.
Make a motion for, is this category 9, item D? Is that the item number?
This is item 9D. the last item on the agenda.
Okay, make a motion for category 9D that the OR designation is not consistent with this plan.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Can we have a roll call?
Dr. Faison? I'm sorry, he left.
He left.
Secretary Chambers?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Shavir?
Yes.
Member Baker?
Yes.
Member Ritchie?
Yes.
Chairman Williams?
No. Okay. Next motion.
Make a motion that item 9D is consistent with the GU zoning district.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Can we have roll call?
Vice Chairman Shavir?
Yes.
Member Baker?
Yes.
Member Ritchie?
Yes.
Secretary Chambers?
Yes.
Chairman Williams?
Yes. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, that last motion you just approved, that was finding that the banquet facilities is consistent with the GU zoning district. Was there a specific use that you found that was to be consistent, or just a general statement that the zoning district is?
My understanding is that it's based on the letter.
Was it based on our interpretation letter, or based on our agenda item?
That's the problem with that. That's the logic doesn't add up when you.
I base it on the letter and the.
Well, if you look on page 76 of our letter, of our agenda item, we interpreted the drawing that was given to us and the discussions we had with Mr. Strickland for this to be a banquet facility event center. That's on page 76 of your agenda. That's the first page. So I'm asking if clarification of that last motion. Was that to find a banquet facility and event center to be consistent with?
Banquet event center is consistent with the GU zoning.
Okay. And is that GU zoning, that particular use that is consistent with to be a public and private park recreation area use
Yes.
that's listed? Okay. In our letter on page 79?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess what I need to ask, if you could do another motion or amend that last motion to.
Okay, amend the motion for category, or item 9D, that the banquet facility event center is consistent with the GU zoning according to the letter from staff to Mr. Strickland. And under item section 59-622, item D, public and private parks, recreation areas, and game preserves.
Are you asking for amended motion? Well, is that what you? Because if that's the case, then we have. Or you just clarification.
Why don't we just clarify, state the motion?
Yeah.
The motion that was voted upon, Lori, what was the roll? Did you get the complete vote on that previous motion? So at this time, the previous motion maker would like to amend her previous motion, and I would like to ask if the second would hold and then have another roll call vote.
That's why. Okay. And so you got what was said, right? Everybody good?
Second hold, and do you want
Okay,
another
so can
vote?
we have to go through another vote because it changed the motion.
Vice Chairman Shavir?
Yes.
Member Baker?
Yes.
Member Ritchie?
Yes.
Secretary Chambers?
Yes.
Chairman Williams?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, so last item was to fix the code. Is somebody wanting to entertain a motion for this? If not, then I'll pass the gavel to the vice chair and make the motion myself.
Yes. You can do that.
All right, so I'm willing to pass the gavel. I may die a second, but we'll see. So I'd like to make a motion to amend the code for general use. I would like to request City Council to direct staff to amend the code, requesting the language change, adding event or banquet center or banqueted, what do you want to call it, banquet center?
We have it as a banquet facility /
Banquet
event
facility.
center.
Yeah.
Okay.
Slash what?
We put a banquet facility / event center. But you could,
I would-
motion could be just banquet.
I would just say banquet, because I don't want to, we'll go through interpretation later on this, but I think
Yeah, I agree with you.
only banquet center is the preferred language, only, and the required minimum land is 10 acres with a conditional use. Is there a second? Or, sorry, I can't do that. You're in charge.
Well, wait a minute, with that minimum land part, I didn't catch that. What was that?
So it's basically saying that you can have a banquet center and a banquet facility in GU, and you have to have a minimum of 10 acres of
10
GU land to even apply for a conditional use permit.
Okay.
I'll second it.
Okay.
We have a roll call, please.
Member Ritchie?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Shavir?
Yes.
Member Baker?
Yes.
Secretary Chambers?
Yes.
Chairman Williams?
Yes.
With the motion passed, and turn this back over to the chairman.
Okay, so took us almost 3 hours. Well, not quite, 2.5. But so what you're looking at is your code is acceptable for general use, and you'll have to address the OR with city staff. Okay.
Well, address OR in terms of changing the zoning on that back to the GU. Which
Yes.
should have been done the first time.
Yes. That's what you're looking at.
I appreciate y'all's input. I know it was a long night, but I appreciate your
Thank
work.
you for far more of your time than you hoped.
Have a good night.
Y'all have a good evening.
All right, moving on.
All right, the next item on the agenda, item 9A, starts on page 7 of your packet. And there should have been a packet of information sitting at your seats. My apologies for not including this with your agenda packet. It was ready. We just failed to put it in there. The memo is a summary of item 9A and 9B. As I said at the last meeting, we would be bringing a corrective ordinance forward dealing with the code update, specifically to address some mainly just errors that we have identified as we've continued to review the code since its initial approval. And so the corrective ordinance summary that you see about halfway down the first page there, that's a summary. Each of those section numbers correspond with the section numbers that are listed in the ordinance itself. And then on the second page, about halfway down, you'll see corrective resolution, and the section numbers that go along with that correspond with the section numbers in the resolution, which is item 9B of your packet. The second item that's titled Land Development Regulations Reference Guide, we put that together as basically as a guide to assist you as you're moving forward with the reviewing new items, because the code, as you're well aware, is organized much more differently than the current code is organized. So on page 1 of 5 of that packet, you'll see a general description of what's in each chapter, and that intent was, if you're looking for information, hopefully you can use that as a guide to at least get you to the right chapter, and then use the table of contents to locate the appropriate section that you're looking for. The following pages are examples of how we as staff and you as reviewers of requests like rezonings and conditional use permits can apply the criteria that are required to be reviewed as part of the CUP, where you can find the information that is associated with each one of those criteria. So I'm not going to go through this entire thing, but I will give you an example. For instance, on page 2 of 5, under the rezoning example, towards the top of the page where it says section 34 12-40A1. This is a criteria that we have to review for any rezoning. Whether the application is consistent with the adopted comprehensive plan and associated elements. So where you would go to look for that information, or a good place to start would be if you go to Chapter 27, Article 3, which is the future land use matrix. It's a good tool that shows, is the requested zoning consistent with either the existing land use or the requested land use. And so each one of those bolded pieces of font has an associated little paragraph with it there of where you can go in the code to find the information to address that requirement.
That's
Yes.
present code.
Do what?
Present code.
No, that is in the new code.
The new code.
Correct. And that's why we put this together.
So all of this is referring to the new code?
Correct.
Okay.
And so that's why we put that together, because here in the near future, the requests that you start seeing will have these new section numbers and those sorts of things in there. So that's why we wanted to put that together.
When might we expect a copy?
Of the new code, we were not anticipating passing out hard copies. Well, all I can say is that the new code becomes effective April 23rd, which is actually a Sunday. So this month they become effective. Immediately when they become effective, the documents will be housed on MuniCode's website, which is currently where the land development regulations are housed. If you want a hard copy, we can get you one. That's not an issue. We were just trying to if no one wanted them, we didn't want to print them out unnecessarily. So if you'd like a copy, please contact me. I'll be glad to get anyone a copy that wants one. But they will be available on MuniCode's website when they become effective on April 23rd. So with that being said, I'm going to use the memo, the 2-page memo, to basically go through item 9A and 9B. And so like I said, 9A starts on page 7 in your packet. And again, this is the corrective ordinance to fix some of these errors that we found in the code the new code as we have continued to review it. And the changes actually start on page 11 of your packet, page 11 of 88. Which is also, it says page 4 or 42 on there either. So the changes are in strike through underline. So this first change in section 3 of the ordinance is just a clarification of the zoning district boundary lines. You'll see there under subsection 5, we changed the word 1 to 2 to make the language basically sound better and read correctly. So that's all we did there. And please feel free to stop me if you have any questions as we're going through this.
I had a question.
Okay.
I want to understand the impact of that. Or you're talking about.
So more or less, this is just a grammatical change. The way the language currently reads, if the water area joins one or more districts, the boundaries of each district shall be construed to extend into the water area in a straight line until they meet the other district. But in reality, if something's going to extend out and intersect with something else, you'd have to be adjacent to 2 or more boundaries. So it's really no change in the policy. It's simply just a grammatical change to make the language read better. And that was something that during our review that the former mayor brought up, and we just didn't have time to get that change incorporated before the original ordinance was passed.
Okay.
And that's just how to interpret district boundaries. Like I said, it is really no change to the
just cuts right through the water.
Right. And so that's common for, in certain areas.
I got a question.
Huh?
There's a body of water, there's a development over here and one over here. How far into that water does one go to the other? Up to the center?
To the center.
All the way across?
Nope, to the center.
To the center.
Correct. Okay, the next, section 4 of the ordinance is a change to section 28-7. The actual change is located on page 13 under subsection 6B. We took out storage, the word storage under B there, you'll see it stricken in red because the 2 zoning districts that are referenced there, the tourist and the community commercial, do not allow outdoor storage. So since they don't allow outdoor storage, there was no need to have outdoor storage referenced in this set of standards here. And so there again, that's just a correction that we caught as we were moving forward through this further review. Section 5, which is also on page 13 of 88, This was originally titled 28-8 or section 28-18. We simply just relocated it to section 34-452. This is dealing with essentially non-conforming uses, and there's an entire article dealing with non-conforming uses in chapter 34. So we just moved it there to relocate that consistent with the remainder of those similar regulations. Section 6 and 7, you will see starting on page 14 and going on to, let me get to it here, down to section page 20, yeah. So on the map on page 20, we inserted to replace all of those maps above. The maps in color, it's easier to read. There again, no change to any of the boundaries, it's just a new graphic image. And then all of these, the maps following that on pages 21 on down through 24, there again, that map up above on page 20 was intended to replace those. We reviewed all those maps and couldn't see any differences, so we consolidated them all into one graphic that tells the story that all of those other maps were telling. And so there again, no changes, just an updated graphic. Sure.
I got a question on your map on page 20.
Okay.
So if you look at, this looks like, gosh, I'm trying to look at I'm looking at the OR, looks like submerged land.
Yeah.
And that's under OR. What is that property?
Some of the properties, and this is pretty common up and down the shoreline, is that some properties, their legal descriptions actually include submerged lands, and so because we take this parcel data from the property appraiser, it just happens to be on there, and at some point in time they were designated with OR zoning. In all reality, they probably will never be used, but they have zoning more or less applied to the water nonetheless. So.
Well, but I'm asking on that because you have, well, you can't use calculations on that anymore.
Correct. You cannot use that to calculate density.
All right.
Yep.
I was just trying to figure out why it was OR and then calculate density calculations, but you can't use those.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, so we will pick back up then. Section 8 starts on page 26. Or sorry, yeah, page 26 of your ordinance, or of your packet. In this case, we changed the definition of automobile repair to better reflect the actual use itself, rather than the original definition said that any building, structure, or improvement, and really that's not defining a use, that's defining a building, and so we modified the definition to reflect what the actual use of a property would be, rather than just a singular building. Moving on, page 27, section 9 of the ordinance. All we did here was change the term funeral home to funeral establishment, and that is just to be consistent with Florida statutes, just using common terminology there with the state. On the next page, page 28, section 10, we just clarified the definition of parking structure somewhat to better reflect what typically these parking structures are. And so there again, just clarification of definition and use. Let's see, page 29, section 11 of the ordinance. Machine shop, again, we modified the definition. The terms that you see stricken there, plumbing, heating, and electrical repair, those are defined as separate uses in industrial districts, and so we wanted to remove those from this machine shop definition so that it wasn't combining two different uses through a definition itself. And we also felt that a woodworking shop or something like that is a very similar use to a machine shop, like a metalworking shop, and so we included that definition as well. Section 12 of the ordinance, the change actually occurs on page 30. You'll see under subsection 3C towards the bottom of page 30. All we did is just added shall language to the beginning of subsection C there to make it consistent with the way the rest of the language in that section is worded. Section 13, section 13 on page 31. In this case, we wanted to, I was getting confused. We wanted to add a pool as a permitted accessory use in the tourist zoning district, because that district also allows hotels, and we didn't want any confusion as to a hotel often has a pool, so we just wanted to clarify that. So that's all we did there. Section 14 of the ordinance, which is still on page 31, we wanted to clarify in the red language there that in the case of a discrepancy in the regulations in an overlay district and in the regular zoning district, that the overlay always prevails. That's common planning practice, and so we just want to make that as clear as possible in the language of the code itself. And so let's see, section 15 of the ordinance, we added in that, I think I have that one.
It's in black. I think it's right here.
Yeah, I have the note wrong, sorry. So in this case, section 30-3, we just want to make sure that for the certain administrative exceptions that can be granted by the administrator of the code, that there has to be certain criteria applied to those, and this section directly before that, 30-2, are where those criteria that the administrator must use to evaluate an administrative exception are located. So we just put a cross-reference in there. That's all that is. The criteria there, we just wanted to insert the cross-reference. Section 16, which is on page 32. During discussions of the adopting ordinance of this, of the new land development regulations, the city council had some concerns, and so basically what happened here is that section 30-38C was deleted because it essentially said the same thing as, I believe, subsection D. Let's see. Is either subsection D or subsection E. So they were repetitive language. We took out subsection C, and then subsections B, D, and E were relocated to section 2.6 of the Environmental Technical Manual. So there again, didn't really delete any regulations. We just moved what was currently in the code over to the technical manual. So it's still there.
But if they were in the technical manual, well, let's see. Okay. So is that part of the reason why you put number 4 up there, additional criteria may be applied in the technical manual?
Correct.
Well, because here's why. What you're deleting is basically saying, we need this information before we proceed forward.
Mm-hmm.
The technical manual tells you to do that. The code mandates you do it.
Correct. Now, I will say on this that some of this language was, if I remember correctly, C was removed, like I said, based on discussion with council, but also because no longer can, and I know we've had this discussion before, no longer can we, when we are reviewing a site plan, require that the applicant provide us any other permits that they're required to get. It's their responsibility to get those. The rest of these simply were moved over, and because staff felt that A was enough to require that obviously they still have to get their permits through any other, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, all the other bodies or entities that you see there under A that are listed. We felt that was enough, and then these other criteria wouldn't be negatively affected by moving them to the technical manual. We typically don't get variances for these, and so we didn't feel that they would be requested for waivers. However, they're still in that technical manual for us to rely on.
So can we go back to this real quick? I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because I know it's getting late, but so tonight's a good example. We have a piece of property. In the past, we would have said this is conservation land.
Mm-hmm.
The land basically is reflected of that, right? But according to what would happen in this particular case is that he would basically tell you, this is what I'm doing, and then it would be upon him to deal with St. John's Water Management District to say, yeah, you're okay, and move forward.
So long as the use was consistent with our zoning, yes.
But you, so what if there is issues with calculations, density calculations?
The way we apply density is that, let's say that someone has a large piece of property like that, the portions that are designated OR could not be counted for your density for the residential portion.
But then that's where I'm going with that. So you have OR on there, and for him to, well, I guess that's be a zoning change, but I'm just trying to get at, you can only look at what you can look at, and that's it.
However, if someone wanted to come in and request to change some OR to a residential in order to maximize their density, we would require that they submit either a wetlands delineation or something else that says that there are maybe no wetlands on the property.
I'm trying to say that, so where are you getting, so in other things, you're going to require those permits?
Or maybe not the permit itself, but the information that we would need to determine.
Well, not permits, it's basically a letter of approval. That they.
Potentially.
Or what
if
about,
they have those approvals.
What about easements? Or would they, well, this is only dealing with that, but
yeah,
I guess it really, if we had scrub jays on a piece of property, we would basically just say, turn a blind eye, or not turn, I don't want to sound harsh when I say this, but scrub jays or turtles or anything, we just say, well, we assume that they've done what they're supposed to do, and
that is what the state has done.
They've mandated that,
right?
According to what Chelsea said.
Now, that's not to say
we're at the fire station.
That's not to say that if we get if someone's out clearing and a neighbor or someone sees whatever tortoises, scrub jays on the property, that we can't go ahead and call FWC as, hey, we've had a report, or they can call and FWC or whoever can go out and inspect. And if that's the case, that the applicant or if the developer hasn't done or retrieved their appropriate permits, then that's something that the developer and that entity deals with. We're uninvolved, other than potentially.
So you can't stop construction to prevent them from destroying the habitat.
If we have verification that it's there, then I believe we could, but that would require us having, other than just someone saw one. We would have to have some kind of verification that habitat has been identified and has been documented on that property.
How do you do that?
Someone would have to have.
No, that's where I'm.
Yeah, I mean, someone would more than likely have to have an environmental survey of the property.
Chicken or the egg? I mean, it's what it's become.
Unfortunately.
Okay.
But again, yeah, I would say our hands are essentially tied at this point on that. We can't require those permits.
Okay.
So let's see, section 17 of the ordinance, page 33 of your packet. And actually the changes occur on page 34 under subsection 6 and subsection 9. This is just to clarify language in the area of critical concern. These changes were addressed with water resources, and the reason that we've included the language in A and B is to make A and B consistent with what C already says in the existing code. So as you can see in subsection, or in 6C, it already says within X number of feet of an active municipal production well site. And so we just carried that language over to A and B above it to be consistent.
Well, my question on that was, so you have inactive wells that you let rest. So what is the language? So if I was near an inactive well, that we know it's inactive and maybe in 10 years we're letting it replenish, can I develop more?
We would default to water resources on that as to whether or not they may have abandoned a well or just consider it unused but an active well, as if they would right, as if it would resume service in the future. So if they say no, we will never use that well again, then they may consider that differently. But they review the area of critical concern just like our engineer does.
My thing on this is the code doesn't say that.
No, it doesn't. That's just how that would be up to their more or less their internal policy.
I'm just saying that this should supersede their policies. This trumps their policies because this is what somebody goes by. This is all you can go by. Well, I guess you have the other portion, your TDRs or not TDRs,
I can't speak with certainty on this, but I think what Trevor's saying is that the water resources may have a definition of an active municipal production well site that includes the non-used wells that are maintained but not used because they're not needed for consumption because of the capacity demands only that we utilize a portion of the active but not used.
I would check into that to ensure that way. If not, I would
do that before
change.
council approves the ordinance.
Sure.
Huh?
We'll do that before council approves the ordinance.
Okay.
Okay, let's see here. All right, so section 18 of the ordinance, page 35. We just wanted to clarify, there's a section of the code that talks about redevelopment of properties, and when properties are being redeveloped, there is more flexibility offered in the code in terms of parking, landscaping, those sorts of things, especially when existing buildings are already on a property. And so we just wanted to clarify, again, that they have to comply with the code to the greatest extent possible, and that the administrator, if they are going to issue an administrative exception, that they have to refer back to that section at the beginning of Chapter 30 to apply those review criteria to ensure that all administrative exceptions are reviewed and applied equally across various different projects. So again, that's just a cross-reference back to a different section in the code. Section 19, page 35. We changed some of the terminology in the landscaping section. After discussing it with our development technical manager, we erroneously changed policy in the code without intending to, and so this is a change back to the landscaping requirements that are currently in place will now essentially continue to be in place. It was not our intent to change what type and or amount of landscaping is required for specific types of development, and so in that case, that is why you see the changes on there, is that we're taking the code back to how it currently reads.
Yeah, but I thought the code before that differentiated between residential and multifamily, or just differentiated between single family and multifamily.
It does not, and that's what we thought. That's what we thought as well, which is why we did that. But it doesn't, and that's where one of the errors was made, and that's why now it's differentiated between residential development and commercial development, and so that's one of the reasons for that change. Let's see, and then I think the next section, yes, section 20 on page 37 of 88. The required landscape yards, all we did here is in the table at the top of page 38, we simply just put a cross-reference into a section up above so that it was clear where some of these standards were coming from. And we were trying to be consistent with that through the code to make sure that since we were putting so many tables in, that you could know what tables were related to each other and that worked in tandem together. And so that was the change in that section. Other than that, there were no changes. Section 21 on page 38, the natural buffer yards requirement. It wasn't clear before that the goal of the code was to have a development retain as much existing vegetation as possible in their required perimeter buffer. So on most developments for residential, for instance, a 20-foot buffer around the entire perimeter is required of landscaping. The goal is to get as much natural vegetation to remain in that buffer as possible. And so we just wanted to make that very clear through this update. So that was the change there. Section 22 of the ordinance on page 39. We wanted to change the downtown design review and waiver committee to the development review committee. That's the new staff level review that will review technical manuals. And so that is just to be consistent with the remainder of the code, just putting in the DRC there. The next section, 23, also on page 39. Let's see. Give me a second here. Section 20. Okay, so this was dealing with the cluster subdivision in the various zoning districts that it would be applied to. Originally, we intended to include this in the rural residential zoning category. However, through the rest of the code today, we decided to take that out, and so this language clarifies the applicability of that development option. In the future, we may include that back in there, but that would be processed through a separate ordinance. Section 24. It starts on page 39, but the changes are actually on page 41. This is tied into the previous section in that you'll see on page 41 at the top there, the purpose in the purpose statement, we just took out the RR zoning reference just like we did up above in the language of that development option. And so let's see, section 25, the next section is on page 43. All we did here was separated out two of the paragraphs to make a subsection A and a subsection B, and then just added the and or future land use, the and or the language in there to clarify you have to be consistent with the comprehensive plan and the future land use map. Section 26, which is on page 43, is dealing with reapplication of submitting the same application for a similar request for a zoning change. And so this was just an error. We left in the word comprehensive plan instead of the word rezoning, and that's so just change that. Section 27 deals on page 43, or starts on page 43, deals with master plan approval. And on this, under subsection B at the top of page 44, we wanted to ensure that public meeting notices were mailed out consistent with other rezonings and things like that. If a master plan was requested, sometimes a master plan may not be tied to a rezoning, but we wanted to make sure that people that would be affected or could be affected by a master plan being approved were duly notified, just like we do for a rezoning or anything else.
What does it mean by Division 2 rezoning and text amendments? I'm Division 2 kind of.
So right now, that would just be the reference to the chapter, to the division in Chapter 34 where that rezoning and text amendments regulations are located. So under Section 34-41.
No, I'm saying you got in accordance with Division 2. Okay, and you're saying
It's kind of a longer way to make that reference to Section 34-41.
Okay.
That's really the section where the advertising and notice requirements are.
Okay. I got it. I'm looking right here, so got it.
Okay. So Section 28 on page 44. This was just simply a change in the language to, obviously the Planning and Zoning Commission will still make a recommendation to City Council. This is just rewording the language to make it a active rather than a passive regulation that City Council will take action once the P&Z recommendation is passed along to them. So then let's see. Section 29 starts on is on page 45. We felt that variances that are occurring within the Community Redevelopment Agency, that the CRA should be notified of any variances just like a property owner would, since they're another body that covers and establishes regulations for the CRA. So all that requires, item D there is just that when a variance is going to be heard within the CRA, that the CRA be notified of that hearing. And that's what that regulation is. Section 30, I'm not going to go through all of these. We made some changes, which I've mentioned already, to various definitions throughout the code. And then we also tried to include definitions where there were no definitions in the code itself. And what we tried to do on these is our staff worked with the legal staff, and we used basically planning manuals as far as how certain things should be defined, and that's what we did. So we went through and added these definitions in where we felt appropriate. If you have any specific questions about any of them, I'll be glad to try and answer them, but I'm not going to go through all of them.
Okay.
So that's basically item 9A. That is the ordinance. And then, so if you want to go ahead, we can finish this item and I'll move on to the resolution if you want, which is item 9B. And then, but they are essentially related.
So we make a motion now?
If you'd like.
Yeah, the other one's fairly. So we'll open this to the public, and we'll close this to the public. Bring it back for the board.
I guess.
And they could be in the hallway, I don't know, waiting downstairs. But, do we have a motion on this item? Member Baker?
I'd like to make a motion to approve item A, ordinance XX 2017.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Can we get a vote on this?
Member Baker?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Shavir?
Yes.
Secretary Chambers?
Yeah.
Member Ritchie?
Yes.
Chairman Williams?
Yes. Okay.
Thank you very much. All right, so the next item, item 9B, starts a few pages after that on page 52. This one is much shorter. So again, this is the resolution that will correct any errors that we found in the technical manuals, and so that's the purpose of this resolution. The first section, section 1, starts on page 54. but the change is in red on page 55. And this, again, is just a grammatical change to make the requirements read more clearly in the technical manual. And so we removed the language readily and reproduce on the ground. That didn't make any sense to any of the staff. So basically what we're getting at is that sufficient data has to be provided on a plat that a surveyor can go out and locate the property itself. And so that's still what the language says. It just says it a little more clearly. Section 2 starts on page 55. Again, the actual change is on page 56, and this is the exact same change. It's just the first one was for a preliminary plat. This is for a final plat. And so, again, no actual change, just a grammatical adjustment to make things a little more clear. And then Section 3 is dealing with general parking requirements. That's on page 57 of 88. And this was just an omission in error from the original resolution that was passed. This is already in the code, but basically we inserted that all developments shall provide a sufficient number of paved parking spaces to accommodate the number of vehicles that are likely to be attracted to the development in question. And so that was just, like I said, to include language that we originally left out of the resolution by error. And so that's all the changes on that one. But if you have any questions, I'll try and answer them.
Okay. Any questions of staff? Okay, we will open this to public and close this to the public. Is there a motion on this item?
I move that we, this one, 20, and XX 2017.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Can we have a vote on this one?
Member Baker?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Shavir?
Yes.
Member Ritchie?
Yes.
Secretary Chambers?
Yes.
Chairman Williams?
Yes. Okay, next is reports. Anything staff would like to report?
I have nothing.
Okay. Petitions and requests from public present. Seeing none. Let's see. She left. Vice Chairman Shavir.
No report?
Secretary Chambers. Anything to
No,
report?
nothing.
Questions? Okay. Member Baker. Member Ritchie. And I have one question. So at the mall, I'm just trying to understand this. So when Parish Medical Center was first proposing to put the treatment, or whatever it is, the facility there, was the staff aware that they were going to put I don't know if that's a 5-foot berm up on to the next to the sidewalk?
I will need to verify this, but if I recall correctly, they received a variance to install that berm at that height and at that slope because it violates what the code typically requires for grade changes. And so if I recall correctly, they received a variance in order to be able to establish that.
That's a variance to staff variance, though, correct?
No, that was a variance they
had
went
to
to
go
board
through-
adjustment for.
All right, because I thought
I will
that-
double check that, but that is
13 variances.
yeah. They received numerous variances for that.
I thought that basically that's in staff's discretion to do whatever you want to do within that.
Not currently, no.
That is why we have these type of developments, so that you have the play to basically move the numbers that typically you wouldn't be able to do, and you put different things in multi-use and these wrapped up projects that you can't do under regional mixed use.
That's not how this was processed. If I recall correctly, like I said, I'll double check and let you know in the morning.
I'm looking at it and I'm driving by it, and I'm just an average citizen of Titusville, but I look at it as well, that's great. It gives them some privacy, gives them some protection. On the other hand, it's just distracting, as well as when they get any type of rains, all that is going to wash onto the sidewalk. We get a hurricane. All that is going to go off into the stormwater utilities, into the streets. It's got the variance, but I don't see how that was I could see bollards, I could see a wall, but not a burn, so.
All I can say on that is that some of the other staff members have expressed similar concerns, and so all the site inspectors are keeping a close eye on that to make sure that it's not completely eroding away during storm events and that sort of thing. So,
I just think I think it's a beautiful building, and I think it distracted from that. When I say beautiful building, it's not like it's a work of art or anything, but I think it was a very nice, appealing building, and I think it detracted from its appearance. But okay, that's all I had. So, I think that's it. I shouldn't have to. I've done this enough times that I shouldn't have to even look at this. But, I apologize for keeping everybody so late tonight. I know that I talked a lot. And I guess we're adjourned.